Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. We got a World War III update. Trump demands war with Venezuela now. I mean, right now. It could be in a minute. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Now let's get right into the content. Exactly what the heck is going on. Let's get into it.
In 2023, Maduro labeled Zionism as more dangerous than Nazism. He said, quote, now the supremacists of today's Zionism want to wipe out the Palestinian people. They want to finish with all the Arab people, with all the Muslim people. They've sown an ideology more dangerous than Nazism. You can't do that.
So now you know the rest of the story. So Stu Peters, a very controversial right-winger, has stumbled onto something that I found compelling. So I wanted to play it for everybody. In case you're wondering why we're starting a war with Venezuela. Why
said that?
Why is Trump so obsessed with Venezuela? You know, we know Trump is the complete tool of Israel and the Zionists, complete, 100%.
Yeah, it's Russian collusion, but you got to pretend they're from Israel.
Yeah. So what everybody thought Russia was doing to Trump, Israel's actually doing to Trump, and no one complains about it.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody in power complains about it. Everybody else does. So listen to what Stu Peters
says. Venezuela, where our Department of War and Pete the Drunkard Hegseth is committing international war crimes, you have Nicolas Maduro, who again has been deemed by the Trump administration to be a terrorist, giving the United States government, in effect, permission, the biggest gang on the planet, to go and kill him.
So like I've said before, I said this in 2010, and I've been saying it ever since, that all they have to do is call you a terrorist, and now you don't have any rights. So the Constitution, and so now they're going to call anybody they want to a terrorist, and then they can lock you up without giving you a trial. It's called indefinite detention, and you don't have to give a trial to people who are considered terrorists. That's called indefinite detention. Pretty sure that's what they were doing to Chelsea Manning, and because he didn't get a trial, or she didn't get a trial, and at the time I think anyway, it doesn't matter.
I didn't know about it till as after it was done. So I'm not like extra smart or nothing. I didn't know about all your rights got taken away while you were not looking.
Yeah. And so just like they did to the woman from Democracy Now! When she was out there protesting or covering a protest against a pipeline, they arrested her and said she was a terrorist. She's doing eco-terrorism. If you say something that they don't like online, they call you a cyber terrorist.
Well, that's real Five Eyes stuff, huh?
Yeah, so now everybody's a terrorist. Everybody's a terrorist. And so now they say, oh, Nicolas Maduro, he's a narco-terrorist. So now we get to do it. So that's the game that's being played. Okay, so here we go. Back to Stu Peters.
So Venezuela, where our Department of War and Pete the Drunkard Hegseth is committing international war crimes, you have Nicolas Maduro, who again has been deemed by the Trump administration to be a terrorist, giving the United States government, in effect, permission, the biggest gang on the planet, to go and kill him, to go and execute it. And they want to install a government that's subservient to the central bankers and to the International Monetary Fund and to private actors. So why do I care?
And that's exactly what they want to do. And you see these chuds on, I only go on Twitter, so that's the only place I see him. And they're like, good, let's get rid of, he's a communist, he's a dictator, let's get rid of him. And then so we get more oil. That's also good. So that's not, this is.
When I saw Misfit Patriot on my X today, because my shit pops up, that guy's a big Zionist, phony fucking guy, and he was blathering about Venezuela. So that's when I started to suspect Israel has something to do with it.
Yep. And so he's onto it. So why? So what Trump wants to do is install the international banking cartel in Venezuela. That's what he wants to do. And so Stu Peters says, why should I care about this?
Monetary Fund and to private actors. So why do I care? As an American, how does that affect me? What does that process look like? Regime change in Venezuela. Well, before we get to Maduro, you could consider some names and some circumstances of the past. Maybe Saddam Hussein, Bashar al-Assad, Muammar Gaddafi. You could consider the way the media demonizes and clamors for regime change or execution, political assassinations, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad in Iran, or of course Russia's Vladimir Putin. But anyway, in 2023, Maduro labeled Zionism as more dangerous than Nazism. He said, quote, now the supremacists of today's Zionism want to wipe out the Palestinian people. They want to finish with all the Arab people, with all the Muslim people. They've sown an ideology more dangerous than Nazism. You can't do that.
So now you know the rest of the story, which is why Trump, who's completely beholden to the Zionists, to Israel, completely to Sheldon Adelson, Miriam Adelson, his Zionist donors, completely controlled by them, because he's in the Epstein files also on top of it.
And he sucked Clinton's dick. Don't forget that, Jimmy.
Okay. Okay.
I'm all in on
so
that.
So now I'm like, why is Trump so obsessed with Venezuela? Yeah, I know they've got more oil than Saudi Arabia. They got the most oil in the world, so that makes sense.
But we didn't go get him then. But now it's like extra, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can't say these things. 2024, he said, quote, as President Lula da Silva said, the Israeli government is doing the same thing to the Palestinians that Hitler did to the Jews, eliminating them. He said that the Gaza crimes, quote, have surpassed the Holocaust. Yeah, the Holocaust inversion thing, you can't do that. In June of 2025, Maduro went on a tirade at a government workshop calling Benjamin Netanyahu, quote, the Hitler of the 21st century. He called him a fake Jew and a crook from Poland. He said that Israel was created, quote, to conquer the Middle East and colonize those peoples. You can't say that. During the post-election protests, he blamed all of the unrest on, quote unquote, international Zionism. He said that the Jews controlled satellites and the media and that they pumped opposition financing to, quote, sow discord. These are things you just can't say. So who's calling Maduro a terrorist? It's the media, whose narrative is compiled by these people. It's owned by these people. It's funded and controlled by these people. The Trump administration is calling him a terrorist, who is owned and operated and controlled and funded by these people. They would love for regime change in Venezuela, just like they would love for regime change in Russia, so they could break that country up into a bunch of little tiny arbitrary nation states like Ukraine. Pump in all kinds of private equity firms, erect central banks, and install Jewish oligarchs as the president. And they do this in all of these places, wherever and whenever they so choose, with force at the end of a U.S. taxpayer-funded gun barrel. So, yeah, if you were wondering what's going on with Venezuela, that's what's going on with Venezuela.
I didn't know that. Did you know that, Kurt, about Maduro's quotes? I mean, of course, we've already reported that's exactly what BlackRock...
I knew he was bad. I didn't know he was that bad.
That's exactly what Vanguard, BlackRock, and the neocons who ran the Biden White House State Department thought was going to happen with the Ukraine. They underestimated Russia. They thought that they could weaken Russia. They could get the people to go against Vladimir Putin, and they could break up, they call it balkanize. They could break up Russia into parts and sell it off to the BlackRocks and the Vanguards, just like they're doing to Ukraine. They already sold almost all the farmland in Ukraine, and Trump's trying to get the minerals, the rare earth minerals out of it. So that's what this is all about. Of course, that's what they're doing.
Yeah, the only disagreement I have is him going the Jews, and I don't know why anybody says that.
He didn't say that.
Very unhelpful. Yeah, he said the Jews at one point.
Well,
don't say the Jews.
I don't think
the Jews.
I don't,
he did.
I don't think he said. He said install Jewish oligarchs.
The Jews own the satellites. He said towards the end of the thing.
Oh, did he say that?
If you say the Jews, you're an asshole. You're not helping.
Yeah,
it's Zionists. The due dissidence boys are Jews. They're not for this shit.
Yeah,
Stop saying the Jews, everyone.
Yeah,
it's not cool. You're helping Zionists when you do that.
Most of the Jews I know aren't for this. Most of the Jews I know.
And by the way, who's in on it with the Zionists? The Jesuits. So that's the Catholics too, if you're a Fuentes fan. So don't get on your high horse, because all your organizations are in on it. It's called the New World Order, and it's going to happen. And you're going to fight with other groups like a jerk off. Not you, obviously, but that's your goal, is to sit there. I don't like that one. I blame this one and whatever. And they're all in league together. None of them are the religion they tell you they are. They all are in some weird Atlantis cult.
Let me hear this again.
So Venezuela, where our Department of War and Pete the Drunkard Hegseth is committing international war crimes, you have Nicolas Maduro, who again has been deemed by the Trump administration to be a terrorist, giving the United States government, in effect, permission, the gang, the biggest gang on the planet, to go and kill him, to go and execute him. And they want to install a government that's subservient to the central bankers and to the International Monetary Fund and to private equity. So why do I care? As an American, how does that affect me? What does that process look like? Regime change in Venezuela. Well, before we get to Maduro, you could consider some names and some circumstances of the past. Maybe Saddam Hussein, Bashar al-Assad, Muammar Gaddafi. You could consider the way the media demonizes and clamors for regime change or execution, political assassinations, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad in Iran, or of course Russia's Vladimir Putin. But anyway, in 2023, Maduro labeled Zionism as more dangerous than Nazism. He said, quote, now the supremacists of today's Zionism want to wipe out the Palestinian people. They want to finish with all the Arab people, with all the Muslim people. They've sown an ideology more dangerous than Nazism. You can't do that. You can't say these things. In 2024, he said, quote, as President Lula da Silva said, the Israeli government is doing the same thing to the Palestinians that Hitler did to the Jews, eliminating them. He said that the Gaza crimes, quote, have surpassed the Holocaust. Yeah, the Holocaust inversion thing, you can't do that. In June of 2025, Maduro went on a tirade at a government workshop calling Benjamin Netanyahu, quote, the Hitler of the 21st century. He called him a fake Jew and a crook from Poland. He said that Israel was created, quote, to conquer the Middle East and colonize those peoples. You can't say that.
So now, so that is, first of all, it's true. Everything that
100% true. What he just
everything
said there.
that Maduro said that he's quoting Maduro saying, it's true.
He knows more than Mamdani.
Israel was there to colonize, conquer, and colonize the Middle East. That's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, that's part of that.
And now they got
Cecil
part of
Rhodes thing from England, and that's the Rothschilds are in it. That's who founded it. And I would take it a step further even and say the word Holocaust means sacrifice, and a bunch of people that are fake Jews and not hate, in fact, hate Jews, even though they're ostensibly Jews, they're fine with sacrificing Jews to get what they want.
That's right.
And they're doing it in front of your face.
That's right. Let's listen to more.
During the post-election protests, he blamed all of the unrest on quote-unquote international Zionism. He said that the Jews controlled satellites and the media.
That.
When you say that, it's an easy fodder to go, oh,
Yeah.
I guess Jewish space lasers, that nonsense.
Yeah.
It's dude. First of all, it's Larry Ellison controls all that. It's one Jew, so it's not even the Jews.
Yeah.
But also, it's Zionists. It's the fucking Zionists.
It's Zionists.
And they're in league with the New World Order of the Rose is the full name. And that's the Jesuits and Catholics too. And also the fake Protestants here that are CIA, PSYOP, neocon Protestants. It's one big club that I hope you're not in it.
So was he quoting Maduro as saying that?
Jews controlled
I bet Maduro didn't say it like that.
He blamed all of the unrest on quote-unquote international Zionism.
So yeah, he's right about that. And then
he said that the Jews controlled satellites and
I don't know if that's a direct quote. Maybe it is.
Right, because why would he make the point of saying they're fake Jews and then say the Jews?
Yeah.
See, that's why I don't think it's a quote from Maduro.
Right. So it's,
and I really hate when people got this thing about the Jews. Like, you are completely an asshole that's not helping when you do that.
Okay. I mean, I'm giving tip of the hat to Stu for all these all this information.
He's right about what he's right about, no question.
He's right about it. He's got this. I didn't know about any of those quotes, and now nobody else is talking about this.
Well, these things don't make sense till you think of Zionism, huh?
Yep. None of it makes sense until you think of Zionism, and then you're like,
and then you realize who benefits.
Of course,
well, really not Jews. They get killed by Zionists. They get sacrificed.
Media, and that they pumped opposition financing to quote sow discord. These are things you just can't say. So who's calling Maduro a terrorist? It's the media, whose narrative is compiled by these people. It's owned by these people. It's funded and controlled by these people. The Trump administration is calling him a terrorist, who is owned and operated and controlled and funded by these people. They would love for regime change in Venezuela, just like they would love for regime change in Russia, so they could break that country up into a bunch of little tiny arbitrary nation states like Ukraine. pump in all kinds of private equity firms, erect central banks, and install Jewish oligarchs as the president. And they do this in all of these places, wherever and whenever they so choose, with force at the end of a U.S. taxpayer-funded gun barrel. So, yeah, if you were wondering what's going on with Venezuela, that's what's going on with Venezuela.
Wow.
Yeah.
And if you want to know what else is going on in Venezuela, the largest oil reserves, Venezuela. Next, Saudi Arabia. Next, Iran. Then Canada, Iraq, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Russia, U.S., Libya. So that's what's going on.
Well, I bet you anything they got energy that we wouldn't need oil, but they're not going to share it, so they're going to kill people to get more oil instead. I'll bet you that.
And if you think that this thing in Venezuela is because Maduro is a narco-terrorist, Trump just pardoned the biggest narco-terrorist ever in the region, the ex-president of Honduras, who flooded America with cocaine.
Yeah, just like he let that guy that shot the National Guardsman stay in the country because they're CIA assets. You don't leave a man behind, Jimmy.
Yeah.
Yeah, help your people.
So I just,
unless they're American, then fuck them.
I thought that I didn't. So good on Stu Peters for digging up that information, and that's great. That really is eye opening. And of course, now you know. Now, if you look at it from that, now you know. Oh, now because I couldn't get over what Trump's obsession with Venezuela is, besides the oil.
Yeah. He's got some Chabad Lubavitch,
and believe me,
Kabbalist telling him.
Believe me, if Trump does what it looks like he's going to do, because he tried to get Maduro to just leave. Maduro won't sell out his country. They had a phone call where Trump allegedly tried to get him to leave, and he won't. And so Trump's going to start a war with Venezuela, and if he does, it's going to be Trump's Vietnam. The guy who became famous and got elected on criticizing the neocons war in Iraq and calling it out for the ridiculous idiocy it was, is now going to start one even worse than Iraq, because it's in our own hemisphere. And now
Zelensky, remember, he was going to end the war, and what did he do?
Yeah, he
got them into a worse war. They're all there to tell you some shit, and you vote like an idiot. And then instead of getting mad and doing something, what you do is you just vote for Mamdani. Everybody just like goes along, and Gore Vidal said, United States of amnesia. Oh, forget it and move on. Oh, COVID, and forget it and move on.
So now you know. And if you'd like to hear my jokes about Venezuela,
in the water, whether they're on the boat or in the water. But I'd really like to see them suffer.
Why? Marco Rubio's whole family was a part of like a narco trafficking empire, but you seem okay with the fact that he's Secretary of State. There's some people who are like broken clocks that are right twice a day. On the left, on the right, sometimes they're right. Maybe they're going with the flow on some issues, so they get it right. Maybe they're right like 5 years too late. But for the most part, there is absolutely no one who actually stands to their convictions through and through. The first stories that I ever did on my YouTube channel, when I was working at a restaurant, I was cleaning dishes and toilets at a coffee shop. I was working 2 jobs. I was doing Uber delivery driver eats on the side. I was working 3 jobs, and I was starting a YouTube show at the same time. You know what the first issues I covered on my show were? I was talking about Venezuela, and I was talking about Syria. And that was in 2020, I think. That was in 2020 when I started my show. And I was just so appalled by what the U.S. government was doing in Venezuela with the sanctions regime and the coup threats, and what the U.S. was doing in Syria with the dirty war that eventually resulted in the ouster of Assad and this new al-Qaeda government coming to take shape as of this past year. I was so disgusted by all of that I was making 4 or 5 videos while working 3 other jobs. And I was working at night. I was working in the morning, 5 a.m., the whole deal, the whole 9 yards. And I was doing this because I actually cared about it. And I actually had principles and convictions. Maybe my political ideals were not fully formulated at the time because I was like 19, right? But I really did believe in these things. I really did believe that what the financial elite, what the media elite were pushing in the United States and in the West was truly sickening. And that's why, and I know a lot of you guys, like some of you guys, you say, oh, I've been subscribed to you for 5 years. I've been subscribed to you since like 2020, 2021. And I know you guys feel what I feel. So when you see people that say things like, oh, Netanyahu is a criminal, Netanyahu is genocidal, what he's doing in Gaza is sickening, Charlie Kirk, there's lots of questions. You know, people who will go get along on some of the big issues that are undeniably just so twisted, they'll take the correct stance. But then on the issues where they know they can kind of get away with lying and do the bidding of their mainstream media elite friends, they will lie. And these people are smarter than that. They really are. Megyn Kelly is an attorney by trade. So you're telling me an attorney by trade, someone who went to law school, probably some prestigious university, Megyn Kelly is coming out now and she's saying, oh, you know, watching these double tap airstrikes on Venezuelan fishermen as they're clinging to pieces of driftwood. You're telling me that that is a person who's telling the truth? She's smarter than that. She knows exactly what she's doing. She's probably friends with Eric Prince. She's probably friends with Rubio. She's probably friends with all these people who are set to have their $1 trillion payday if a war onto Venezuela is successful. And that's why I do this stuff, because no matter when these people are correct, maybe they're correct on big issues, you cannot trust them fully. You cannot even trust them 50% of the time. You should put no faith in these people. No faith whatsoever, because if the job of a truth teller, if the job of a person who's fighting for the truth, whether you're a journalist, whether you're a politician, whether you're an actor, I don't really know what you do in your life, whether you're just a person who wants the good of humanity, at the end of the day, I personally think it's really simple. You should be putting your faith in God to give you purpose, and you should be putting faith in the people that you are speaking to or representing or who are following you to give you strength. I don't know where Megyn Kelly puts her faith. I don't think it's in any sort of God. I think if she put her faith in God, she would not be salivating over airstrikes on innocent civilians, innocent fishermen. And we're going to watch this video in a second. I know we usually do the roll call at the start of the stream and whatnot, but I just had to get this off my chest. It was bothering me so much. I don't know where she puts her faith, but it's not in God, given the things that she's saying. And I definitely know she's not putting her faith in the people to give her strength, because she is lying through her teeth as she claims to believe Trump's narco-terrorist story, that these are all a bunch of narco-terrorists. Let me be clear. The fishing vessels that these men are on that are getting airstriked, by and large, okay, they are small boat vessels that would need to be refueled 20 times to reach the United States. These people are not coming to the United States, folks. These people are fishermen who are trying to fish for, I don't know, mahi-mahi off the coast of Venezuela or Trinidad and Tobago. These are not narco-terrorists. Yet we have Megyn Kelly who's coming out and saying this.
So I really do kind of not only want to see them killed in the water, whether they're on the boat or in the water, but I'd really like to see them suffer. I would like Trump and Hegseth to make it last a long time, so that they lose a limb and bleed out a little. Like, I'm really having a difficult time ginning up sympathy for these guys who 10 seconds earlier almost got taken out by the initial bomb, but because they managed to get ejected a little too soon, had to be taken out in the water. I realize legally it may make a difference, but truly, Mark, this is a tough case to really gin up the sympathies of the American people.
Yeah. What the hell did she just say? She wishes she could. She's salivating. She's salivating over this. She's like borderline having some fetish that turns her on, talking about, oh, I wish that Pete Hegseth could do a targeted airstrike that would blow their limbs off so they could slowly bleed out in the Caribbean. What? Let's just say, for example, that they are narco terrorists. We know that cocaine, fentanyl, it's not coming from Venezuela. We're past that. We've moved on from that sort of argument, right? Well, and also Trump, he pardoned the former president of Honduras this week, Juan Hernandez, who is held in. He was being sentenced in a U.S. prison for 45 years for trafficking like a ridiculous amount of cocaine, like 45 million pounds of cocaine, something ridiculous number, like a fictitious number like that. Anyways, let's just say they are all narco terrorists, right? Now, obviously, at some point, if there are people, and there are people who are taking small boat vessels or submarines or whatever, they're taking these vessels to the coasts of the United States and bringing drugs on shore, smuggling across, coastlines, Coast Guard in the middle of the night. Maybe they're I don't know where they're landing. Maybe they're landing in Oceanside, California. Maybe they're landing in, I really don't know. Okay. They're clearly landing somewhere. Maybe they're landing on who knows? Well, let's just say that's what's going on here, because obviously drugs are getting into the United States somehow, right? I'm not going to deny that. No one would deny that. If that's the case, why does the United States not airstrike every single shipping vessel that they assume may be drug trafficking participants off the coast of the United States? Why don't they just have Coast Guard go around and arm Coast Guard with F-16s, F-35s, and airstrike these suspected drug vessels? Because each and every day, by the way, the U.S. Coast Guard does stop ships. They do stop vessels off the coast of the United States, like near Miami, for example. They stop tons of ships each and every day and inspect them for carrying drug paraphernalia. Now, I believe it was Thomas Massey or Rand Paul, one of them said, of those that we stop, of those suspected drug trafficking ships that the U.S. Coast Guard stops off the coast of Florida on a daily basis, only 25% of them are actually found to be carrying narcotics. So if the U.S. gets it wrong 75% of the time in our own territorial waters, with all of the training, all of the technologies, all of the assets that the U.S. Coast Guard possesses, and I'm sure they see the same patterns taking place over and over. They can detect these patterns near the U.S. coastal waters or in coastal waters. If they can do all of this and they still get it wrong 75% of the time, you will never be able to convince me that it is justified to just willy-nilly airstrike random vessels in Caribbean waters. This is just insane. Take a listen.
So I really do kind of not only want to see them killed in the water, whether they're on the boat or in the water, but I'd really like to see them suffer.
Why? Marco Rubio's whole family was a part of like a narco trafficking empire, but you seem okay with the fact that he's Secretary of State. Why? Why do they need to have some untold level of suffering? What happened to the Christian tradition of, repenting for your sins and then being forgiven by others? Is every single alleged narco trafficker, even if they're not actually a narco trafficker, but if every single person that Pete Hegseth suspects might be a narco trafficker, are they somehow undeserving of being on this earth? Are they somehow deserving of suffering some untold level of pain and bloodshed and violence thrust upon them? What even is this? What level of deranged, twisted fetishization of just crazy violence?
So I really do kind of not only want to see them killed in the water, whether they're on the boat or in the water, but I'd really like to see them suffer. I would like Trump and Hegseth to make it last a long time so that they lose a limb and bleed out a little. Like, I'm really having a difficult time ginning up sympathy for these guys.
I'm sorry. It's like, it's so comical. Can anyone ask Megyn Kelly if she feels this way about the Sackler family, who has poisoned each and every single community, impoverished communities, prosperous communities all across the United States with opiates, with opiate addictions, killing countless Americans each and every week? What does she feel about the Sackler family? Does she think it's okay that the Sackler family has, like, their names, enshrined in prestigious libraries and universities all across the United States, that they're large-scale political actors, that they can donate to politicians, they effectively control the entire media apparatus around Big Pharma? Like, what do we think about the real narco terrorists? Why should we expect that, like, a small vessel that would have to be refueled 20 times to reach the United States, it has 11 people on board? That doesn't make sense. If you're trying to smuggle drugs into the United States, don't you think that you would have like 1 or 2 people on board and use the excess space to carry more drugs? Are we using our brains? Like, we're not even using our brains, let alone addressing the fact that this is extremely illegal. She is an attorney by trade. She is not retarded. She is lying. Some people look at this and say, oh, she's so stupid. She's going along with the agenda. No, she's lying because she has a friend somewhere who has paid her to say this, or guaranteed she's going to get on a deal. She's going to get in on a deal in Venezuela for oil, for something, if she goes along with the agenda.
Who 10 seconds earlier almost got taken out by the initial bomb, but because they managed to get ejected, a little too soon, had to be taken out in the water. I realize legally it may make a difference, but truly, Mark, this is a tough case to really gin up the sympathies of the American.
Legally, it might make a difference. A double tap strike on people that pose zero threat to the United. Okay. These boats already, this is going to be the last thing I say on this. These boats already pose zero threat to the United States. Legally, it might make a difference, she says, that the boat was already exploded and they had no way of literally getting to any nearby landmass because they're clinging to a piece of driftwood in the middle of the Caribbean. Probably going to be eaten by sharks or something, right? But instead of allowing them to suffer that fate, which maybe Megyn Kelly would have preferred, circle back around, double tap strike. Extremely illegal. Yes, 100%. Even Newsmax is saying this is illegal. Okay? You have these libertarian right-wing Congress people. It is extremely illegal, unconstitutional. You even have the GOP who's saying that the House, the Congress, is controlled by the GOP. And the GOP is even saying, yeah, we might need to do some House Oversight Committee hearings on this because this is kind of crazy. Apparently for Megyn Kelly, the suffering is not enough. Technically, it might have some legal issues, technically. But no one has any qualms about this. No one has any moral qualms about this, right? Yeah, fuck you, Megyn Kelly, lying to your teeth, promoting this satanic anti-human agenda, killing innocent people. Can't say I'm surprised. I never trusted you. I thought you said a few good things, but wow, you really showed your true colors on this one. Before you
que si el cartel de los soles, que ahora es organización terrorista, ridículos, son unos ridículos.
Calling the move ridiculous, Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez blasted the United States over its formal designation of Venezuela's Cartel de las Soles as a foreign terrorist organization. The move comes after U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the group allegedly imports illegal drugs into the United States. Rodriguez called it a non-existent group.
Que el cuento del narcotráfico.
The U.S. has said members of Cartel de las Soles, or Cartel of the Suns, include Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro himself and other high-ranking officials.
Worm? No.
U.S. officials have also accused the group of working with Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, which Washington also ties to Maduro, who has always denied any involvement. Maduro accuses the U.S. of seeking regime change out of a desire to control Venezuela's natural resources, especially its oil reserves. The U.S. for months has waged a campaign of deadly strikes against suspected drug trafficking boats off the Venezuelan coast and the Pacific coast of Latin America. Experts have questioned the legality of the strikes, and a Reuters poll this month showed that only 29% of Americans support using the military to kill suspected drug traffickers without a judge or court being involved. On Monday, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told reporters that Trump did not plan to stop the strikes on suspected drug boats.
We view the Maduro regime as being illegitimate, and the president has been very satisfied with the successful strikes against narco-terrorists and foreign terrorists that are illegally trafficking drugs towards the United States of America. He's not going to tolerate that, and you can expect to see those strikes continue.
President Trump has built up U.S. military bases in the Caribbean, and on Monday, a wide array of aircraft was seen at the former Roosevelt Roads Naval Base in Puerto Rico. It's raised concerns that the U.S. may seek to use the Cartel of the Sun's new designation to justify military action, though sanctioned experts have said the statute does not authorize such a move. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said the Cartel of the Sun's designation would bring, quote, a whole bunch of new options to the United States, in excerpts released recently from an interview with One American News.
There are a lot of things happening right now in the world. And for me, I am very excited. I do not look at the events happening in the world as scary or as something to fear. I do see judgment happening, but I know that it's not for Yah's remnant. And so as I'm focused on him, he has provided me with an overwhelming sense of calm and stability, while at the same time, excitement and anticipation. The craziest thing to understand and know is that everything about our life today has to do with choice. What you choose to focus on, what you choose to devote your time and energy to, what you choose to let provoke you to fear, or what you choose to rely on that gives you strength. It's all choices. Everything right now is about choice. And if you've been focusing on Yahuwah, you have made the most important choice of your life. And in the times that we're in, you will soon see the reward for it. But it does come in the midst of challenge. This world is about to head into a storm. And if you're not ready for it mentally and spiritually, you run a huge risk of being taken down by something that was not meant to take you down. So I am working on the Waking Up series. But as this news continues to come about, I wanted to make sure that I provided some reality checks for many that don't listen to the mainstream and that know not to trust what the mainstream is saying. I think there's some important points that everyone needs to understand about what's happening right now. I mean, here's the deal. I don't even know if it will happen before this video is released or not. But based on the rhetoric, the United States is going to speed up the narrative for this new world order by going to war with Venezuela. There is a lot of rhetoric, and this has nothing to do with drugs. Whatever the issue is, it doesn't really matter though. The focus is not on what is going on, but what will come from it. What I want to stress right now is a simple reminder. The rest of the world is asleep, extremely distracted. This is the holiday season where everyone is spending this month spending money they don't have on gifts and planning Christmas and New Year celebrations and whatever else, doing many things to offend our Father. Everyone is distracted. And I believe that all signs are saying that 2026 is going to be a challenging year. I mean, it's already possible that the government shutdown happens again at the end of January. What I want to do is give some advice to the remnant. If you are of the remnant waiting for the kingdom of Yahweh to come, Please use this time while everyone is being distracted and make sure that you are preparing for 2026 and any negative event that can and will affect your life. I feel that it's important to at least give this reminder that you need to be getting your house in order and preparing yourself for this world to move into physical judgment. If the United States does go into Venezuela, this could be the lifting of the second seal when peace is taken from the earth, and you need to be prepared for it. So as this month of December starts off, I want to give a brief reality check and strong reminder to get your house in order and get ready. We're going to talk about it. Let's begin. Okay, so let me just fill you in on what's happening. A couple of months ago in this video, I spoke about the United States attacking Venezuelan ships in the Caribbean as they say they're all about drugs. Okay, whatever. If you're actually one that is believing that any of this is about drugs, I need you to really snap out of it. You really, truly are trapped in a lie. Anyways, Trump was attacking Venezuela's ships who they say were carrying drugs. But then he continued to escalate, and now he sent aircraft carriers in the region.
U.S. warships appear to be gearing up for action against Venezuela off the coast of Puerto Rico. 15,000 U.S. soldiers are now stationed in the region. There are also 15 U.S. naval vessels off the Venezuelan coast, including the United States' largest aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald Ford, which can carry up to 90 planes. On the streets of Caracas, uncertainty is making people wary.
We are all afraid, but we must continue with our lives. What else can we do? If we stop, we will achieve nothing. We have to move forward and act like nothing is happening. That's the truth. Tension? Yes, there is tension. It feels like a tense calm, where you know something could happen, but you don't know when.
Life goes on, but with a lot of crisis, a lot of problems, and few solutions. This has led all of us to the situation we are in, with parents here alone and children abroad, only seeing them on video to check in. I don't know how this situation in the Caribbean will end or how it will be resolved.
And then he threatened to strike Venezuela by land.
President Donald Trump says the United States will strike inside Venezuela, quote, very soon. He made the statement while speaking to members of the U.S. military on a Thanksgiving phone call. Have a listen.
And in recent weeks, you've been working to deter Venezuelan drug traffickers, of which there are many. Of course, there aren't too many coming in by sea anymore, if you probably noticed that. We'll be starting to stop them by land also. The land is easier, but that's going to start very soon. We warn them, stop sending poison to our country.
The U.S. has killed more than 80 people in strikes on alleged drug trafficking boats in the Caribbean. The administration has offered no proof that the vessels were actually carrying drugs.
Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro says his position hasn't changed and that he is willing to engage in face-to-face dialogue with Donald Trump.
Peace will be my haven, my greatest desire, my hope. To say it is our victory, and peace will continue to be our victory, achieved through our own efforts.
But Maduro also stresses that Venezuela is prepared to defend itself, with Trump warning that the U.S. will soon target suspected Venezuelan traffickers on land. Maduro's armed forces may well be put to the test.
Yeah. And then a couple of days after, he says that Venezuela airspace should be considered closed.
Tonight, the Trump administration is increasing pressure on Venezuela and its leader, Nicolas Maduro. President Trump saying on social media, airlines should consider the airspace over the country closed in its entirety. Trump this week designated Maduro and his allies as members of a foreign terrorist organization and also suggested that land strikes could be imminent. CNN contributor Stefano Pozzebon is joining us now from Caracas. Stefano, how is the Venezuelan government reacting to this post today from the U.S. president?
Well, Jessica, we haven't heard directly from Nicolas Maduro, and that is quite telling me. Let me tell you that. Before we do a little bit of analysis, we do have, however, a statement from the Venezuelan government saying, in the words of their defense minister, Vladimir Padrino Lopez, that no external power has any faculty to interfere, block, or move any decision on the sovereignty of Venezuela. So total rejection from those words from Donald Trump, who early on Saturday had said that he had a message to airlines and pilots to consider the airspace over Venezuela closed, and that seemed to pave the way to some form of direct intervention here in Venezuela.
That means war. Here's the thing, though. All of this is a bunch of nonsense, and it's just for a narrative for the mind-controlled public that believes anything that the media tells them. Understand, this is not about drugs. This is about oil. Just like the Iraq War in 2003. Before this new world order begins, in order to control the narrative, they are going to make sure that they control all the energy markets. Let me give you a brief breakdown of what I'm talking about. Right now, Venezuela holds the world's largest proven oil reserves, but its contribution to the overall world oil market is minimal. This oil industry didn't grow by accident. Venezuela's oil industry was started by Rockefeller's Standard Oil in the 1920s and 30s. Rockefeller's Standard Oil created the company Creole Petroleum Corporation, and this company built the oil fields in Venezuela mostly under the leadership of Nelson Rockefeller, once governor of New York, and vice president under Gerald Ford.
Stretching along the eastern shore of Lake Maracaibo in Venezuela is one of the industrial wonders of modern times, the oil-producing complex of the Bolivar coastal fields. More than 2,000 oil wells in ordered ranks, reaching almost to the horizon. One of the largest known oil deposits in the world, this resource has brought a new light to the people of Venezuela. The oil beneath these waters belongs to those people, but the stupendous task of bringing it to the surface, refining and marketing, has been the work of private foreign capital and engineering genius, much of it North American. And half that work has been done by one company, Creole Petroleum Corporation. Creole is an American company, an affiliate of Standard Oil Company, New Jersey, but it operates exclusively in Venezuela, making its headquarters in Caracas, a sparkling modern city whose progress is rooted in oil. From its Caracas offices, this company conducts its business in the interest of the Venezuelan people, as well as its own stockholders. This is the story of an American business firm which has become an integral part of a nation's social and economic progress.
They controlled the oil in Venezuela. So yes, Standard Oil of New Jersey, also known as ExxonMobil, started the oil industry in Venezuela, and it was the Rockefeller family who began financing the development of Venezuela and the other Latin American countries through their corporation, IBEC. That's International Basic Economy Corporation. These are the ones who built up Latin America. It was through their financing. Anyways, they are the ones who control the oil industry. So long story short, Standard Oil of Venezuela ran through the Creole Petroleum Corporation. This was the main power in the region from the 1920s until its assets were nationalized in 1976. You see, when a country nationalizes a market, this means that the government takes control of private industries or assets, which can lead to decreased competition and innovation. They basically made sure that they put a lock on it so nobody else could come over there and compete. So the government of Venezuela controlled the oil industry. But as long as the United States controlled the government, they control the industry. So obviously, before they nationalized the oil industry in Venezuela, the United States was forming their government in Venezuela by spreading democracy like they do all around the world. Venezuela shifted to democracy in 1958, and after this, most other South American nations began falling under the iron-fisted rule of US-backed military dictatorships. This is the history of the United States in Latin America.
After World War II, fears of spreading communism took America's Cold War battle to every corner of the globe.
It must be the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation. If we falter in our leadership, we may endanger the peace of the world.
U.S. economic interests long drove American foreign policy in Latin America, but the success of the Cuban Revolution in 1959 focused attention on the dangers of the Soviet Union's ideological expansion so close to home.
In less than 4 years, Fidel Castro, who came to power on a wave of personal popularity, has allowed himself to become dominated by Russia. Her support now constitutes a threat to Western security.
In response, the U.S. supported coups against leftist governments in Brazil, Ecuador, and Chile, and even sent U.S. troops to the Dominican Republic. Then, in 1979, Nicaragua's U.S.-backed dictatorship fell, sending new alarm bells off in Washington.
Nicaragua has become the first Soviet foothold on the continent of the Americas. A military buildup unprecedented for Central America, aided by nearly 2,000 military and security advisors from Cuba.
U.S. officials turned their attention to El Salvador, where military repression of popular dissent had fueled a growing leftist insurgency. The tiny country soon became America's line in the sand.
It was said here today the decisive battle for Central America is underway in El Salvador.
If we do not act promptly and decisively in defense of freedom, new Cubas will arise from the ruins of today's conflicts.
We're not talking about an effort that is focused on a single country, Salvador. We're talking about an effort that affects an area of enormous geopolitical importance to us, the United States.
If I recall correctly, Secretary of State Haig went to President Reagan and said, "Mr. President, this is one you can win," quote unquote.
Military and economic aid poured into the country, as did American military advisors, and Reagan threatened to go further.
The White House today refused to rule out the eventual use of American combat troops to help prevent the overthrow of the government in El Salvador.
But the strategy emboldened El Salvador's right-wing government, which had already shown itself adept at political violence.
For U.S. policymakers, the case of El Salvador fits the classic definition of diplomacy, choosing between the undesirable and the unacceptable. The question remains, how far is the U.S. prepared to go to prevent the unacceptable?
President Reagan gave almost a green light to fighting this war any way the Salvadoran military wanted to fight it. The way they wanted to fight it was a strategy of massacres. And that strategy meant that the chief victims in El Salvador in this civil war were always civilians, always unarmed people.
In the end, more than 75,000 Salvadorans were killed, and there was no quick victory.
10 years later, they were still fighting. And our main contribution was to destroy El Salvador over the next 10 years. A whole generation was wiped out. The productive capacity of El Salvador was terribly damaged. And it was simply a case where our reaction lacked all proportionality. We tried to defeat an authentic revolutionary movement, and it proved impossible, even in a postage stamp country the size of El Salvador.
And El Salvador was far from alone. American foreign policy had supported autocratic rulers throughout Latin America.
The Reagan administration extended the official hand of friendship to another military or authoritarian government today, this time to the government of Chile.
It's a desert of dictators, the whole region in the south, and then the whole civil wars in Central America.
America's complex legacy in the region continues to play out today.
The military and security forces of these repressive coup regimes were trained by the United States at the U.S. Army School of the Americas. So when the governments controlled the oil, they were in control of it all. Now listen, all the specifics does not matter. What needs to be understood is that under all of this is the control of the richest families in the world. They are the puppet masters of all of this. And as Albert Pike laid out in his plan, they're taking advantage of the rift between the agentors of the Illuminati. But they've created the rift. In regards to the United States narrative, the conflict with the United States government is when Hugo Chavez took control in 1998 and started the Bolivarian Revolution, which is said that he introduced a series of economic and social reforms that was said to dramatically reduce poverty and illiteracy while greatly improving health and other living conditions for millions of Venezuelans. The people of Venezuela loved Hugo Chavez.
Pero nada de crédito, ni de apoyo técnico. Bueno, ¿y qué pasó con los campesinos? No llegó al campesino los beneficios del petróleo y de la riqueza nacional. Pues bien, eso ahora no puede ocurrir de nuevo. Y ese es uno de los principios que están contenidos en la Constitución revolucionaria y bolivariana.
As part of his proclaimed mission to educate and his promise to make government more accessible, Chavez held a weekly radio and TV show where any citizen could phone in and talk directly to the president.
The reforms, which included nationalizing key components of the nation's economy as a part of an agenda of socialist uplift, made Chavez a hero to millions of people and the enemy of Venezuela's oligarchs, this being the people who built the country in the first place. And so Hugo Chavez was marked by his assertive anti-U.S. stance, which he leveraged to redistribute oil wealth and forge new diplomatic ties with countries like Russia, China, and Iran. And this is where you need to understand things from right now. He built an alliance with the East. The administration of George W. Bush, whom Chavez he infamously called the devil in a speech before the United Nations.
I think that the first people who should read this book are our brothers and sisters in the United States, because their threat is in their own house. The devil is right at home. The devil himself is right in the house. And the devil came here yesterday.
He didn't know it when he came to America.
Yesterday, the devil came here. Right here. Right here. And it smells of sulfur still today. This table that I am now standing in front of. Yesterday, ladies and gentlemen, from this rostrum, the President of the United States, the gentleman to whom I refer as the devil, came here talking as if he owned the world. Truly, as the owner of the world.
George Bush backed a failed military coup against Chavez in 2002.
The attempted 2002 coup against leftist leader Hugo Chavez in the oil-rich nation of Venezuela reveals the pseudo-NGO at work.
Se acabó el caciquismo de aquellos caudillos adeptos, esa falsa democracia de la élite en Venezuela se acabó.
Venezuela is important because they're the third largest supplier of petroleum. I would say that Mr. Chavez, and the State Department may say this, probably doesn't have the interests of the United States at heart.
During the coup attempt, the Bush administration immediately voiced support for the plotters.
The Bush administration made it clear it is happy with the change in leadership in the country responsible for 15% of America's oil imports.
Initially, many observers attributed the support to an ideological affinity between the coup faction and the Bush administration. However, it soon became apparent that the coup was actually sponsored by the United States itself. The National Endowment for Democracy had funneled millions of dollars to Venezuelan dissident groups and politicians, many of whom took up cabinet positions in the short-lived government. In the media, an illusion was conjured of a popular uprising and government crackdown. In reality, Chavez had the support of the vast majority of the population. This was soon made apparent when an actual uprising arose in response to the coup, forcing the Venezuelan military to reinstate the deposed leader. That the CIA has overthrown countless governments around the world is no longer a closely held secret.
After George Bush, Barack Obama continued Bush's policy of demonizing Chavez, whose government he called authoritarian. In 2015, Obama declared Venezuela an extraordinary threat to national security, which is a very wild claim considering the country has never started a war in its history.
Defiant Nicolas Maduro arrives at a meeting, a televised gathering of ministers and top officials, including those on the new U.S. sanctions list, a way for the Venezuelan president to respond to Washington's latest move.
President Obama has decided to put himself into a box of failure. He will be remembered in the future for his decision today and the aggression against the Venezuelan people.
Now, by this time, Nicolas Maduro had already come into power. You see, after Hugo Chavez died in March 2013, Maduro, who was Hugo Chavez's vice president, assumed the interim presidency and then later on won the election and held power since. Now we get to Donald Trump's first term. In his first term in 2019, he pursued an explicit maximum pressure campaign aimed at regime change in Venezuela. I don't know if you remember that. In January of 2019, the United States, along with more than 50 other nations, formally recognized opposition leader Juan Guaido as the legitimate interim president of Venezuela. They tried to strip diplomatic recognition from Maduro's government. Trump's administration imposed severe economic and oil sanctions designed to cut off revenue to Maduro's government, including freezing Venezuela government assets in the United States and targeting its state energy company, Petroles de Venezuela. If you remember, this is the time when extreme hyperinflation happened in Venezuela. They were trying to take it down. The Trump administration authorized the CIA to conduct covert operations inside Venezuela to support the effort to oust Maduro, but it all failed. During that time, Trump repeatedly stated that a military option was not off the table, and in one instance asked senior advisors about invading Venezuela.
2 Russian Air Force planes landed in the capital city of Caracas over the weekend, reportedly carrying a Russian defense official and nearly 100 troops. The arrival comes as the United States, along with dozens of other countries, are pressing Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro to step down, to be replaced by opposition leader Guaido.
Russia has to get out. What's your next question?
While Moscow backs Maduro, Trump says all options are on the table, including the military.
All options are open.
He was responding to a reporter's question Wednesday about whether the United States is willing to put boots on the ground to remove the Russians. The American president also assured Fabiano Rosales that the U.S. is going to get it all worked out, while also criticizing Maduro over the failure of efforts to get humanitarian aid into Venezuela.
We've sent hundreds of millions of dollars worth of aid to the border. He won't take the aid. He'd rather have his people starve than take the aid. I don't think that's good, even from a political standpoint. Even from a dictator standpoint, I don't think that's good.
The point is that this is not new.
As governments and nations focus on the coronavirus, there's a growing threat that cartels, criminals, terrorists, and other malign actors will try to exploit the situation for their own gain. And we must not let that happen. We will never let that happen. Today, the United States is launching enhanced counter-narcotics operations in the Western Hemisphere to protect the American people from the deadly scourge of illegal narcotics. We must not let the drug cartels exploit the pandemic to threaten American lives. We're deploying additional Navy destroyers, combat ships, aircraft and helicopters, Coast Guard cutters, and Air Force surveillance aircraft, doubling our capabilities in the region.
It may be only new to people if you haven't been paying attention and you haven't been following the news from so long ago. And this all leads us to where we are at today. Trump is ready to attack Venezuela, but to the general public, he's talking about drugs because the masses are asleep and they believe anything. But they are looking to have control over the oil. Now, let's be clear that the real power behind the scenes, they still have control over all these industries. It's not as if Maduro is rogue and has control and power and he's cutting off the power from the real people in power. Absolutely not. The power behind the scenes creates the situations for the world conflict, and it's all by design. Trump is just carrying out his part. And so he is now moving aggressively and says that they will move against Venezuela very soon. Perhaps before this video is even released, who knows? But you have to see how the chess pieces were moving, because he did not move until he brought Mohammed bin Salman, that's the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. He didn't move until he formalized a new agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia. Just this month, Trump elevated Saudi Arabia to a status of major non-NATO ally. And the two sides signed a new strategic defense agreement that expands U.S. military access rights, formalizes Saudi burden sharing commitments to defray U.S. costs associated with defending Saudi Arabia, and clears the way for major arms transfers, including future F-35 deliveries and nearly 300 U.S. tanks. Notice, this is all about war. He made sure that Saudi Arabia had his back. There was also a critical minerals framework that was agreed upon to bring Saudi investments into United States supply chain products, and also a landmark AI memorandum granted Saudi Arabia access to advanced American systems and hardwares, including chips from firms like NVIDIA and AMD. It said that Trump appears to put Saudi Arabia on par with Israel as a strategic partner of the United States. I mean, even understand this, the Crown Prince expressed general interest in Saudi Arabia one day joining the Abraham Accords. And you see, after that visit is where you see the ramping up of all this rhetoric of war in Venezuela. Didn't happen before then. Russia and China, they haven't said much about the United States coming against Venezuela. It's not in the mainstream talks is what I'm saying. I've seen different reports saying that Russia said that they have Venezuela's back, but it's not the mainstream. What needs to be clear is that this is all about oil. Who controls the energy? And so we don't know what is to come of this all, but we do know that this is major escalation. It's escalation that they have been trying to get accomplished for years now. They've been trying to come at Iran, and you saw that they attacked Iran this year, and they've been trying to come at Venezuela, and now he's talking about doing it right now. Everything is happening right in front of your faces. And so it would not be smart for you to have your eyes closed and be asleep to it all. So what I want you to understand is that what the mainstream is saying is far from the truth, and is very much deeper than what they're feeding the general public. It doesn't matter about all the specifics, though. What matters is that they are moving aggressively because they are transitioning us into this new world order. War is upon this world. Change is upon this world. And I want the remnant to be ready for it all. That's the only thing. You can't change any of this. You can't worry about any of this, but you need to know what's happening in front of you so you could be ready for it and it doesn't take you by surprise. Now, the first part of being ready for this is being mentally equipped to not fall from the mind control. I give you the backstory to let you understand that what you're seeing in the mainstream is not true, and there's a great amount of other factors in the midst. This is all about energy and world war. And if you have watched my other videos as I've shown how all the sides have been preparing themselves, you should understand that this is all very real. So the thing is that if you're not mentally attached to this and whatever the narrative is, whoever they create to make the enemy and make you attached to it, you will do fine if you stay disconnected from it. My main point to tell you is to get your houses in order. This is not a time for fear, but excitement. But you must get your houses in order. Prepare for some hard times coming. I expect 2026 to be a very challenging year. There are warning signs everywhere. And I do not believe that we're really done with that government shutdown nonsense. I mean, that whole thing, it just got kicked down the road until January 30th. When they reopened the government this last time, it was only until January 30th. So if they do not come with an agreement, that whole situation could restart again. And it doesn't seem like anybody's talking or negotiating anything. They're not talking about it in the mainstream right now. I know that much.
So let's talk about it live now to CBS News congressional correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns. Caitlin, lest we celebrate progress too fast, I've got some math for you. 78 days. That's all we have between now and January 30th when this funding bill ends, and we could do this all over again. I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer here, but what is the insurance policy that we won't have this very same problem in 78 days?
Too soon, Reed, too soon. But you're exactly right, because we could be in a very similar situation in just a couple of months from now.
There also has been a lot of aggressive changes going on in the government, with many people stepping down and new leaders trying to emerge. Things are changing. There's a new narrative forming. We are in a powder keg. It's happening very fast, so it can be very easy to miss it all and go about your daily life. What I'm telling the remnant to do is to use this month of December while the masses are distracted with this holiday nonsense and make a plan. If you haven't started buying food supplies, please start this now. You don't have to have a whole bunch of money to do this either. Make some changes to your current lifestyle so that you may be able to afford supplies. Please start preparing for hard times that are coming. This is what I'm trying to communicate. This is the time to prepare mentally, physically, and above all, spiritually. We are in a changing world, and all these events are about moving us directly towards the beast. And if you're not mentally ready, you're going to fall for the strong delusion. If you're not spiritually ready, you're not going to know who it is you should be depending on, and you won't truly understand what it is that you should be waiting for to happen in regards to the promises of our Father. Being physically ready is important if you are able, because when the food on the shelves at the stores go away and people start panicking, if you have supplies, you don't have to be a part of the madness. And for some of you that don't have the resources to start getting supplies, this also can be a benefit because you already know how to work through struggle and how to work through hard times. Most people aren't in that situation. And so for you, your current struggles may be just preparation that will help you endure. Don't look at things negatively because it's not always negative. Yah is covering you if you allow him to. By the way, I have made videos about preparing. So if you have questions, Please go back to these videos and review them and take whatever actions you can. But you should prepare because things are turning up. I also have this preparation list that you can download and use. It's in the description box. Now, let me say this about the preparations. Please understand your preparations don't matter more than your faith. If you're getting your house in order, that is more than just your physical preparations. Don't stress about them if you really aren't able to. Again, if you lack resources or your family isn't on board with you, our Father understands and He knows your situation. Our supplies are not our source. Our Father is our source, and you must be about placing your trust in Him. This world has a plan for all of this, and they will walk all of those without faith into their oppressive hands. Your faith must be strong so you are able to hear our Father's voice and trust in Him. For many of you that are losing your jobs or money's really getting really tight right now for you, please do not lose faith. Again, our Father understands what is happening and He has a plan for you. He will not leave you, but you must not leave Him. Just understand what's happening in this world. The stakes are getting higher, and that's why it's so important to really live and walk in faith and the truth. If you understand Him and how much He cares for us, then you must really live with that assurance and hold on to Him. Scriptures say, rest in Yahuwah and wait patiently for Him. Do not fret because of him who prospers in his way, because of the man who brings wicked schemes to pass. Psalms chapter 37, verse 7. You don't fret because of these wicked people. Now, for those not in the United States, please don't get it twisted. Don't review this as just something about the United States. Understand, once the real problems happen in the United States, it's going to affect the whole world. The United States attacking Venezuela is a good catalyst for world war. If it happens, you should be prepared for it wherever you are in this world. Understand, there is massive chaos on the horizon, and as believers, we must stand planted in our faith and wait for our Father to move. I don't know His exact plans and what exactly He's going to do, but I am assured that my trust and faith in Him will not be in vain. He will see us through. Understand this about me. I am not a prophet, and I do not claim to be one. I see danger and risk, and I believe in preparing for it. The scripture says a prudent man foresees evil and hides himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 3. I refuse to live asleep while my enemy moves in daily to surround me. I know because of who I believe in and who is in me, I have power if I walk in it and trust in Him. So I will. I remember the psalm as it says, though I walk in the midst of trouble, you will revive me. You will stretch out your hand against the wrath of my enemies, and your right hand will save me. Psalm chapter 138, verse 7. I believe in that. I believe in being diligent and prudent. So I am. And this is what I'm doing. And during this month in December, I am making sure my house is in order. For me personally, I am living for His promises and waiting on Him. And because of that, because I see a storm coming, I am preparing for it. This is not to press fear upon anyone. This ministry is not about fear. It has always been about preparing the bride for the bridegroom. I will not allow us to sleep while the enemy moves so cunningly and deceptively and just marches in on people without anyone saying a word. No matter what your situation is, remember what He has said. If you're worrying about your job, your money situation, where you're going to live, or anything else, stop worrying and focus upon Him. Anytime fear comes to you, rebuke it and read your Bibles. Turn off the television, turn off social media or whatever else is grabbing your attention, and focus on Him. This is the most important moments of your lives. Take things day by day, and remember Yahusha said, therefore I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? Which of you by worrying can add 1 cubit to his stature? So why do you worry about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. And yet I say to you that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Now, if Elohim so clothes the grass of the field, which today is and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will He not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? Therefore, do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? For after all these things the Gentiles seek. For your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. But seek first the kingdom of Elohim and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about its own things. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. Matthew chapter 6, verses 25 through 34. Remember this verse. Remember that. Also remember in Revelation chapter 21, verse 8, and make sure you're not any one of these type of people. It says, but the cowardly, unbelieving, abominable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Revelation chapter 21, verse 8. You better make sure that's not you. Also, Paul reminds us, therefore let us not sleep, as others do, but let us watch and be sober. For those who sleep, sleep at night, and those who get drunk are drunk at night. But let us, who are of the day, be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and as a helmet the hope of salvation. For Elohim did not appoint us to wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Master Yahusha, the Messiah, who died for us, that whether we wake or sleep, we shall live together with him. Therefore comfort each other and edify one another, just as you also are doing. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 6 through 11. Understand, if you recognize that all these events happening in this world are all spiritual and it's about the God that you serve, make sure you're making it your business to serve Yahuwah. Make it your business to live by faith in him. Make it your business to not walk in fear, but in strength. Make it your business to be a living representative of the good news, so that even though people's ears are closed, they can see him through their eyes watching you. Do not fold in your faith when the finish line is right around the corner. I'm going to say it one more time because it's important. Do not fold in your faith when the finish line is right around the corner. Everyone's faith is being tested right now, some differently than others, but it's all about enduring and coming to the finish line and receiving your crown. Persevere, overcome. Remember his promise in Revelation chapter 3, verse 10. He says, because you have kept my command to persevere, I also will keep you from the hour of trial which shall come upon the whole world to test those who dwell on the earth. Behold, I am coming quickly. Hold fast what you have, that no one may take your crown. Revelation chapter 3, verses 10 through 11. The hour of trial is coming upon the whole world. This is what I keep talking about. Make sure you overcome and persevere. Get your houses in order. Make sure your family is looking to Yahuwah and not keeping their minds in deception. Teach them all, young and old, to look up and not straight ahead or down. If your family is not on board with your faith, then pray for them, but do not let them bring you down. If getting your house in order is just about getting yourself in order, then that is what it is. You will not stand at the judgment with your family, so do not let them hold you to their fate if their trust is not in the Most High. Keep your faith and trust in the Most High. I mean, you know, all these Christians right now, they're all living in delusion. They're waiting for this false pre-tribulation rapture to happen while they're putting up Christmas trees and celebrating this pagan holiday. They think they're ready for what's happening. And that verses like Revelation chapter 3, verse 10, they think it's about them. They are in the strong delusion, and they are not going to be covered and protected when the storm starts. Why would they be protected when they're celebrating pagan holidays and living lawlessly? It's going to turn out bad for many. You are being warned right now so that you can be ready and prepared and not be like them. It's hard to hear, I know, but it's the truth. You cannot be like them. I wanted to make sure that I gave this advice because I see things moving fast, and there isn't a lot of sound advice being given on the internet. Please take this time to focus on being ready for a challenging 2026. Have some food supplies and have a plan of action if things start getting dicey. Do not move in fear, but in an excited expectation that the world is about to move into judgment so that we can be moving into our promises. Judgment has to happen. These things have to happen in order that we move into what our Father has for us. So please, focus on living in the truth and being ready. The world has to get judged. You can't get past that. Don't worry about the external noise and the mind-controlling banter. Just understand that the birth pangs are getting stronger, and that's because the kingdom is about to be birthed. You must endure to the end so that you can be a part of it. So please, make that your mission today. What you must do right now is simple. Read and study the word daily. Pray daily. Trust him and let go of your cares and troubles. Place it all upon our Father in heaven and submit to his will. Believe in Yahusha the Messiah as redemption for your sins, as the sacrificial lamb for your sins. He is our atonement. Keep your faith in him, and your faith will be rewarded. Stay strong and be diligent. get your houses in order and prepare for hard times that are coming ahead, because you must see by now that the kingdom of Yahuwah, oh, it's truly at hand. Be ready for it.
Why can't everyone agree on what really happened? Lines still blurred about blowing those alleged drug boats to bits, including 2 survivors.
It gives me no pleasure to say what I'm about to say because I worked with Pete Hegseth for 7 or 8 years at Fox News. This is an act of a war crime, ordering survivors who the law requires be rescued instead to be murdered. There's absolutely no legal basis for it. Everybody along the line who did it, from the Secretary of Defense to the Admiral to the people who actually pulled the trigger, should be prosecuted for a war crime for killing these 2 people.
More troubling news for Donald Trump regarding his narco boat strike campaign. It was sold as a bold, decisive, and tough plan on defeating those trafficking drugs, and it seems to have blown up in his administration's face.
Breaking news, waving their arms. Sources telling CNN the admiral who formally called for the second strike on the alleged drug boat in the Caribbean told lawmakers that the survivors were waving at something in the air before the second strike, although they say it is unclear whether they were surrendering or asking a U.S. aircraft for help. We are also learning that Admiral Bradley told lawmakers that the boat was going to meet a larger vessel heading to Suriname. Suriname's a small South American country east of Venezuela. And that may matter because U.S. drug enforcement officials tell us that drug trafficking routes via Suriname are primarily destined for European markets, not the United States. Of course, President Trump has explicitly said that this boat was an imminent threat heading to the United States, saying, quote, the strike occurred while the terrorists were heading to the United States.
First, this week's added scrutiny of what even fellow Republicans have alluded to as a possible war crime regarding a alleged double boat strike back in September.
There are some guys at Leavenworth who made really bad choices on the battlefield.
No kidding.
And I do think there have to be consequences for abject war crimes. If you're doing something that is just completely unlawful and ruthless, then there is a consequence for that. That's why the military said it won't follow unlawful orders from their commander in chief. There's a standard, there's an ethos, there's a belief that we are above what so many things that our enemies or others would do.
You know what? I agree with 2016 Pete Hegseth.
And now this, a Colombian family is accusing the United States of killing an innocent fisherman and has taken their case to an international human rights commission. Back in September of 2025, one of dozens of strikes carried out by the U.S. forces against alleged drug trafficking boats in the Caribbean, Alejandro Carranza's vessel was bombed. The U.S. claims that the strike targeted a drug smuggling boat. Carranza's family, however, insists that he was just fishing with no ties to trafficking whatsoever. The complaint says that the strike amounted to an extrajudicial killing. And the family is accusing the U.S. of violating international human rights norms, naming both senior U.S. military leadership and, by extension, the administration itself.
Colombian President Gustavo Petro said one of those killed was a Colombian fisherman and was not involved in drug trafficking.
No hay necesidad de tirar misiles, es absolutamente ineficaz. Y no parece estar dirigida esa acción realmente a incautar cocaína, sino a una invasión, que también es absurdamente ilegal.
Trump used the Navy anniversary speech to announce yet another strike. 6 men killed in the Caribbean.
In recent weeks, the Navy has supported our mission to blow the cartel terrorists the hell out of the water. You see that?
And just days after that, on October 16th, a strike left 2 survivors. They were quickly handed over to their home countries of Colombia and Ecuador, a move that prevented them from challenging their detention in court. Authorities in Ecuador later declined to file charges against their national, but Colombia said they would pursue a legal investigation on their individual.
And as I mentioned, this is just the latest in what has been a troublesome week for this administration regarding these very attacks.
If this was a legal action of war, which is still under dispute, then it would be a war crime.
If it was not, it was a murder. In either case, again, the right way to find out if there are drugs aboard a boat is you stop the boat, you board it, you investigate it. And in the process, you learn if there are drugs, you learn about the strategies involved, which gives you information to help dismantle a broader operation. Blowing a boat up, not even knowing much about what the boat is doing, simply destroys that type of information. So it's not only extrajudicial, it is also stupid. And so this is vast concerns about judgment. And by the way, of course, this is all a prelude to the possible strikes on Venezuela itself.
I mean, since the beginning of this maritime strike campaign, U.S. forces have reportedly killed over 80 people in 20 plus strikes, a count that includes several cases where survivors of an initial strike were allegedly killed in follow-up attacks, prompting accusation of double tap strikes, with lawmakers stating that the American people would be completely appalled by the video footage if they are to see it. And I mean, it's become that problematic that even our allies are withholding intelligence as a means to not indict themselves in any wrongdoing.
The United Kingdom is suspending, listen to this, suspending some of its intelligence sharing with the U.S. because of the Trump administration's strikes against alleged drug boats in the Caribbean.
We are joined now by senior White House reporter Kevin Liptak and CNN national security correspondent Natasha Bertrand. Natasha, to you first with this exclusive reporting. I mean, this is a big deal. The UK is arguably the closest ally to the United States when it comes to intelligence sharing. What else do we know?
Yeah, Pam, it's a really significant rupture here. Essentially, what we're learning is that the UK is no longer sharing intelligence with the US about these suspected drug trafficking vessels in the Caribbean because it does not want to be complicit in the US military's strikes on these drug vessels and believes fundamentally that the US military's use of force against these vessels violates international law, according to multiple sources that we spoke to. Now, previously, the UK had been happy to help the United States locate and interdict vessels that were transiting the Caribbean that appeared to be trafficking drugs. But the key difference, of course, is that it was helping the Coast Guard intercept those vessels, arrest those on board, seize the drugs, and allowing these individuals to have some semblance of due process. But now the U.S., of course, has started striking these boats unilaterally with military force, killing everyone on board. The total now for number of people killed is around 76. And we're told that the UK is deeply uncomfortable with that, and they believe that it is pretty blatantly illegal.
And as I've said time and time again, and I've actually heard many Republicans echo this very point, the problem is with transparency. We are just expected to take this administration at their word, to take Pete Hegseth at his word, that these guys being bombed are basically bad guys and no details need to be provided. But then when a fisherman's family, rather than traffickers, as they continue to allege, ends up appealing to a human rights body, then the narrative deserves to be questioned, no? Especially if innocent lives are being lost. I mean, by dragging the case before the Human Rights Commission, a respected regional rights body, Carranza's family then ensures that the story becomes global. Therefore, regional allies and international observers are now focused on how the United States, under Donald Trump, justifies lethal force in international waters, and whether or not they are continuing to cross a line into unlawful killing or war crime territory. And not to mention, the domestic fallout has already caused a major rift between fellow Republicans, with many of them coming out and speaking against their fearless cult leader.
If they're armed, show us that they're armed. If they're not armed, explain to us why we kill people who are not armed. So we usually think of war, we think of those people taking up arms and they may kill our soldiers, so we kill them first. That's war. But these people, we haven't been told if they have arms. 2 of them they killed in the water, but 2 of them they scooped up. And did they arrest them for drugs and get drugs that were floating around in the sea? Did they look for arms? No, they just released them and said, go back to your home country, which really wasn't Venezuela. It was Colombia and Ecuador. So I think this whole thing is a terrible situation, but we as a country should not be so easygoing as to say, well, an accusation is enough. We sometimes make mistakes, even in our country, even when we're very, very careful. The DNA Innocence Project found that there were people in jail in our country with full due process well, we made a mistake. They've been in jail for 20 years. Do we really think blowing up boats without any kind of process? We got records from the Coast Guard yesterday that we released of boats stopped off of Venezuela before we had this new policy. So we've had an interdiction policy for 100 years probably, where we interdict people on the open seas and the Coast Guard does it. The Coast Guard statistics say that of boats off Venezuela, 21% of those boats didn't have drugs.
And it's not a single isolated mistake, right? The maritime strike campaign has been widespread, with recent reports emerging that commanding officers were forced to step down after voicing their concern over the legality of these strikes. What we've been sold as basically a newly packaged war on drugs campaign is lacking any semblance of transparency. We have no details on those that are being attacked, no proof provided that they were in fact trafficking drugs. We're just expected to swallow the snake oil that Pete Hegseth is selling.
Hey Midas Mighty, it's Ben, Brett, and Jordy, and we just want to thank you for being the backbone of this movement.
This year tested us more than ever, but together we proved that pro-democracy
or another country in Latin America, whether it's Guatemala, Haiti, Cuba, or elsewhere. And I fear, and I think that that's a critical issue that can unite most people. You may not like Maduro, but you also have to think of the terms of what is national sovereignty, what is independence, what is the rationale behind an intervention. And any opposition force that supports an intervention, a military intervention, in many ways is not asking for a change, but it's asking for them to be replaced with them.
Hi, I'm John Kiriakou, and welcome to Deep Focus. All eyes this week are on Venezuela and on what the White House intends to do about Venezuela. Frankly, everybody's got an idea, an opinion, but we really don't know. Should we expect to see the United States actually put ground troops in Venezuela? Are we just sitting with our fingers crossed, collectively that is, that Nicolas Maduro gets on a plane and runs off somewhere? Or is this about China? Even beyond that, is this really just Donald Trump bluffing? And is he going to announce next week some grand idea that we're going to have peace with Venezuela and everybody's going to be friends again? Who knows? I don't know, but our guest probably does. I'm very happy to welcome Professor Miguel Tinker Salas. He is one of the world's leading experts on Venezuela. He is Emeritus Professor of History and Chicano, Latino Studies, and author of Venezuela, What Everyone Needs to Know, and The Enduring Legacy, Oil, Culture, and Society in Venezuela. He currently teaches at Pomona College, and we're happy to have him. Professor, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I don't mean to make light of the situation in Venezuela. Of course, this is a very serious thing. On the one hand, we've got the White House ordering drone attacks on boats that we're told are drug boats. I'll tell you from my own time as the senior investigator on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee staff, I actually looked at drug trafficking from and through Venezuela, and frankly, I couldn't find any. Certainly, Venezuela is a way station for individuals involved in the drug trade or for some of the cartels, but it's really Colombians using Venezuelan territory to sell their drugs. I never saw any evidence or any intelligence indicating that the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, was involved in drug trafficking, but the White House is saying that no, we have it all wrong. Do we have it all wrong? What are you seeing here?
Well, first of all, I think you're correct. This is not about drug trafficking. I think that they've created the notion or the idea or the narrative that Venezuela is a producer of cocaine and of fentanyl, none of which is true. According to U.S. intelligence services back in March and April, they reported on Venezuela. It said there is no fentanyl production in Venezuela. Most of the precursors all arrived through Mexico or other countries, so that Venezuela does not produce fentanyl. I can only imagine the face on the generals when Trump asked them to produce targets that produce fentanyl in Venezuela, and they had to tell him, well, we can't find any. And as you pointed out yourself, U.S. intelligence reports that maybe less than 7% of cocaine traverses Venezuela en route to Europe, not the U.S. The very notion that these launches that are being attacked in the Caribbean were headed for the U.S. represented a clear and present danger to the U.S. or had to be blown out of the water because they were going to the U.S. is absurd. This is not about drug trafficking. So then what is it about? It is about re-engaging and assuming the position of hegemon of the U.S. in Latin America. The target here right now is Venezuela, but long-term the target is Cuba. Long-term the target is Nicaragua. Long-term the target is Mexico. This is about, in many ways, reasserting U.S. hegemony, which it had lost in some ways in the last 25 years with the rise of leftist governments in Latin America. This is about China. This is about displacing China. On September 2nd, when the U.S. announces it is destroying boats of the Caribbean, China was investing $1 billion in oil production in Lake Maracaibo to try to reactivate wells that have been left behind 20 or 30 years ago. So this is not about drugs. This is about a change in government. This is about reasserting U.S. hegemony in the Caribbean and in Latin America as a whole, where China is the dominant economic exchange for most of South American countries. So again, this is not about drug trafficking.
You know, it was always my understanding. I'm not an oil analyst, so please feel free to correct me and ridicule me if you'd like. But it was always my understanding that while Venezuela is sitting on an ocean of oil, it's a very dirty, very high sulfur content kind of oil, and that you need a specialized refinery in order to take the sulfur out of the oil, and that those refineries exist in South Texas. That's why even when our political relationship with Venezuela wasn't always the best, we had very strong economic ties. It was all based on this oil and the refining of the oil. Then a couple of years ago, it was during COVID, the Chinese announced that they would build a specialty refinery in the Caribbean on one of the islands. Is that true? And if it's true, is that a threat to, I'm going to call it American control over Venezuela's oil, that the Venezuelan oil wouldn't be refined any longer in the United States?
Well, it hasn't been refined in the U.S. for a while.
The sanctions killed that, didn't it?
Except for the Chevron license, which is about 100,000 barrels or 200,000 barrels a day. Chevron has a license. Interesting that while the ships are being blown up in the Caribbean, Chevron is still pumping oil in Venezuela. Interesting that while Trump has declared a no-fly zone, Trump has also requested that American planes bringing back returnees, Venezuelan returnees, would be accepted. So that's going on. But you're right, Venezuela has 303 billion barrels of oil, that's supposedly, but it's heavy crude. And heavy crude, as you pointed out, requires solvents and requires special mechanisms to process it into a sellable quantity. So heavy crude was good for heating oil, but it's heavy in sulfur, so it's not good for the gasoline production that we're so accustomed to with oil. So the U.S. in Houston, where all the refineries were at, is where you had the actual refining process. The Chinese began refining in their own country, so as did the Indians, who also began to produce oil or buy Venezuelan oil. So Venezuela, despite the sanctions, has been selling oil, but it's had to sell it at a discount because it has to go through a series of transshipments and masking boats where they're at and where they're going to and how they're getting there. So in that context, many countries have benefited from the sanctions by buying Venezuelan oil at a discount. But yes, undoubtedly, the larger issue here is that, yes, everyone says it's about oil, but they don't add what you added, which was the fact that it's heavy sulfur. It requires dilutants. So you have to buy those solvents from Algeria. You have to buy those solvents from the U.S. So there's that irony of dependence that goes even further. Venezuela is dependent on its oil production, its oil revenue, but it has to buy solvents to refine it and to make it actually sellable on the world market.
Given Venezuela's efforts to cultivate new alliances during this very strange period in relations with the United States, and what the United States is trying to force in the form of diplomatic isolation, and there's this threat of U.S. military action, of course. How do regional and global power dynamics shape the prospect for negotiation versus escalation? Is there any effort right now to try to talk the United States back?
There was. In fact, Brazil, Qatar, other countries have been involved in a process of trying to establish negotiations. Maduro himself floated a couple of days ago that there was a deal underway that was approved by the Chinese, but then Maduro had backed out. That could be black ops. We don't know if it's true or not. But there has been efforts at negotiation. In fact, the current crisis arose after the Biden administration negotiated certain conditions for elections in July of 2024. And those elections are the ones that now are the condition under which the Trump administration claims that Maduro is not the legitimate president and that therefore they want regime change. But they wanted regime change before this. They wanted regime change back when in 2002, when the coup happened under George Bush, the son. They wanted regime change in 2015 when Obama declared Venezuela a clear and present danger to the U.S., even though, again, it didn't have a Navy or an Air Force that presented a challenge to the U.S. So it wasn't a clear and present danger. It was an effort by Obama to throw red meat at the conservatives when he was opening up relations with Cuba. So they wanted regime change in 2019 under Trump when he established maximum pressure and recognized Juan Guaido as an interim president of Venezuela, along with 60 other countries, and mounted an offensive on the border with Colombia, claiming that they would see the ouster of Maduro. They wanted regime change in 2019 when there was a coup by Guaido and Leopoldo Lopez against him. They wanted regime change in 2020 when there was a former Green Beret who proceeded to try to carry out a coup in Venezuela. So again, the idea of regime change is not new. The context for it has changed. Now it's under the auspices or under the umbrella of narco-terrorism, because if you declare narco-terrorism, you create the context in which the U.S. claims to have the legitimate authority to intervene in Venezuela, which it does not have.
You know, I'm going to ask you a question that may sound rhetorical. It's actually not rhetorical. I really mean it. I was having a conversation earlier today with a friend who noted the use of these made-up terms, and we were laughing about the term Islamofascism, which the Bush administration tried to make widespread in its use around 2005. It didn't catch on, and people don't use it anymore. It turned out to be a talking point from the Republican National Committee that had come from a PR firm. But the term narco-terrorism, to me, sounds like it is coming from a PR firm. If you look at the word terrorism, it is the attempt to effect political change by instilling terror among the civilian population. So what is narco-terrorism? The words don't even make sense when they're put together like that. What are we supposed to take from this vis-a-vis Venezuela?
It sounds like an oxymoron.
Yeah, it does.
But the reality is that with the war on terror after 9/11, the media and the narrative was the war on terror, the war on terror. The Trump administration has made an issue of the question of drugs. Here's an irony. They're talking about wanting to stop drugs, and yet they just gave a pardon to Juan Orlando
Yes.
Hernandez, the former president of Honduras, who actually was involved in drug trafficking, was convicted in a U.S. court, not by Biden, but by a jury that was selected, a federal jury that found him guilty of trafficking 400 pounds of cocaine into the U.S. That actually said, if I remember right, the quote, "I want to stuff cocaine up the Americans, the gringos' nose." I think that was the actual use of the term. So again, the narrative shifted when Trump gets into office the second term and wants to reapply maximum pressure on Venezuela. And the context becomes, it's part of the war on drugs. Yet there's no money for public health in the U.S. There's no money for addiction. There's no money for the things that might actually prevent drugs from having a market in the U.S. And never address the question of addiction in the U.S. or why people are using fentanyl or why they're using methamphetamines or why they're using cocaine. That's the reality. As long as there's a market in the U.S. and the U.S. is the largest market for illegal drugs in the world, there will be someone to supply it, whether it's Colombians or whether it's somebody else or whether it's Americans, because we tend to think of cartels only in Latin America. What happens when those drugs cross the border? Someone is trafficking them, someone is moving them, someone is delivering them. There are cartels in the U.S.
That's a good point. I had a podcaster ask me a question earlier today, and it was whether or not Nicolas Maduro had won the 2024 election. And I said, it was my understanding that he had won. I know several people who were there as election observers who came back and said that what they had seen was that he had legitimately won. Certainly, conservatives are saying that the election was stolen. There were accusations of the CIA being involved in one way or the other. Do you believe Nicolas Maduro won the election? Is he the democratically elected leader of Venezuela?
I think the fact that they failed to produce the actas or the actual ballot regular from station to station raises the doubt about the election. And that's the fundamental issue here. Now, the opposition claims that they have all the actas. I find that claim also to be problematic because I just don't see any way that they actually have all the ballot records. Right. So I think there's a quandary here in terms of Maduro. The idea that some Macedonian hacker broke into the National Electoral Commission and stopped the counting of the ballots, I also found kind of ridiculous. I was there for the July 2024 elections myself. I walked through the entire process. I saw the process. People participated. There were hundreds of thousands of people on the streets waiting in line very diligently to vote. So I know that there was a strong participation. In some ballot areas, there was Maduro support. In some areas, he had no support whatsoever. So I think that in that context, the issue is complicated, problematic. But I think that if he had won cleanly, they would have provided the ballots.
What does the role of what is the role, I should say, of Venezuelans who are in the United States and will be returning to Venezuela, whether or not they want to? Maybe some are being expelled, maybe some decide to go back, whatever the situation may be. Are there enough Venezuelans? Are there enough anti-Maduro Venezuelans who might go back and change the outcome of the current political situation, or even democratically in the next election?
There are 650,000 Venezuelans on TPS, temporary protective status. The Trump administration has withdrawn that. So here we have another interesting conundrum. That is, you are claiming the government is authoritarian in Venezuela. You're claiming that it's a dictatorial government, yet you want to send people back to that government. And again, the people who are the immigrants, the exiles, are constantly caught up in the middle here as pawns in a process, both by the opposition and the government. In that sense, it's tragic. And it's difficult to rationalize, but they are also being caught up in this. The Venezuelan diaspora is millions. Yes. Venezuela was not a country that actually had migrated because of oil profits and because of the condition of the economy. There was poverty in Venezuela. Let's not kid ourselves. What gave rise to Hugo Chavez was the inequality. What gave rise to Hugo Chavez was the conditions that existed in Venezuela. That so-called pacted democracy. The people are fond talking about the richest country in Latin America that had poverty, and that had large numbers of people who were poor. And that system was corrupt, and that system is what caused the rise of Hugo Chavez, and that is undeniable. But people tend to forget that. They want to rewrite the narrative. We want to go back to the past. We want to recapture that grandeur past. That doesn't exist anymore. The reality is much more complicated. But yes, there's another part of there. So there are many levels or layers to that exile community. Part of that exile community is the leadership of the opposition that now reside in Madrid or in Miami and have Marco Rubio's ear. We hear Trump say they're opening up their insane asylums. They're opening up their jails. They're sending them all to the U.S. That's straight out of the opposition playbook coming from Maria Corina Machado, from her segment of the opposition. Because again, there's also different segments to the opposition. There's Maria Corina Machado's group, González Urrutia, Leopoldo Lopez, and others. And you have other members of the opposition, and not all of them support a U.S. intervention. I think it's important to highlight that there are different layers within that opposition itself. They may all be united by wanting to get Maduro out, but that doesn't mean they support a U.S. intervention. So again, to bring back to your question, part of the exile community is what has Marco Rubio's ear. He is their representative. He is their spokesperson. He is in many ways carrying forth their agenda, and in many ways is driving this policy.
Well, let's talk about prospects for American intervention. I want to get your thoughts on what intervention might look like. You mentioned, for example, that Venezuela doesn't have an Air Force or a Navy. It doesn't.
No, it does have an Air Force and Navy, but it just doesn't have one that can compete with the U.S.
That's what I mean. We send one aircraft carrier battle group there, and that is enough to defeat, I think, the Venezuelan Navy. But can you see things getting to that point? Already we know that here in the United States, there isn't going to be a congressional debate. There isn't going to be a declaration of war. There isn't even going to be a vote on the use of force. This is going to be a unilateral action taken by the White House. But what might that action look like? Can you envision troops on the ground in Venezuela? Or would troops on the ground really mean troops in Caracas? Or might we be seeing something more secret, a CIA action against the Venezuelan government? And even then, what would that look like?
I don't think we're going to see boots on the ground. I don't see that actually happening. While doing my own research in Washington in the National Archives, the military archives, I found in 1946 a plan to invade Venezuela. I found another one in 1948 written by the military attaché, and it had all the conditions. It had ships coming in from the U.S. It had bases in Cuba and Guantanamo. It had bases in Panama, bases in Colombia, bases in Aruba, all of them contributing to an intervention. And then it also had the component of a large American expat community living in Caracas and living in Venezuela as the intermediaries for this invasion. And that again it had three plausible reasons. A foreign power has invaded Venezuela. Venezuela has a rebellious government that won't sell oil to the U.S. And third, there is social tumult that doesn't allow for oil production to take place. So oil was a factor in all three of those. And they actually had as a condition setting up a conservative government that would align with the U.S. So those are interesting factors in a 1948 report around an invasion of Venezuela. So I don't see boots on the ground. It's the old adage, if you break it, you own it. And if you're going to go into Venezuela, you have to think about what happens the day after. What do you do with the Venezuelan military that up until now has remained loyal to Maduro? What do you do with a political apparatus that up until now has remained loyal to Maduro and that is entrenched in every position of power within Venezuela? How do you replace that? How do you are able to create a context for governability? Can you govern? Will you descend into chaos? Will there be factions of the military creating territories that are theirs? Oil-producing territories in Maracaibo will fall under the control of a certain group, another territory under the Orinoco Basin. Those are all the challenges one needs to confront, because I don't think you flip a switch and all of a sudden you transfer a country from what has been a very complex authoritarian government into a so-called democracy without repeating the same process. So I foresee, and the talk on the street in Caracas, I spoke to a friend this morning, is that there might be an attack directed at a particular military target, similar to what happened in Iran, where the U.S. bombs the site and claims that it obliterated everything and that the issue has been resolved. But I do think that the flotilla has a lifespan. I don't think it's there forever. But I do think something important to highlight, if the larger issue is China, if the larger issue is the U.S. hegemony, that fleet will stay in the Caribbean for a long time and will be playing a role in the Caribbean for quite a long time.
What do you see as the potential roles of countries like Colombia, for example, which until recently was joined at the hip with the United States militarily. It's different right now. Or Cuba, or China, Guyana. Now that Guyana has found great wealth in new oil discoveries.
And Trinidad and Tobago, which is opening
that's right.
Opening its bases for the U.S. military to practice, as they did during World War II. And it's the base was called the Gaza Strip, by the way. The military base in Trinidad, where the U.S. destroyers used to attack German submarines, was called the Gaza Strip. I think that we saw is the realignment. I would take your question and frame it this way. Why hasn't the U.S. looked for a multilateral force? Because it has opponents in Brazil. It has opponents in Colombia. It has opponents in Mexico. Countries that are not willing to join the U.S. and that under the Cold War and the Cuban Missile Crisis would have joined and did join the U.S. in trying to sanction Cuba with the missile crisis. In here, they're not. That speaks to the changes in Latin America that have happened in the last 20 years, where the U.S. is not the dominant power. That's why it relies on military power when it can't rely on political power or economic power. In that context, it's an important weakness that the U.S. is exhibiting in the context of Venezuela as it tries to militarily muscle its way and affect regime change. So those are the countries that are the leading countries in the region. But again, there is a right-wing tendency in Latin America right now. We saw it in Argentina. We saw it in Ecuador with Noboa. We've seen it in other countries in Latin America. We see it with Guyana because Guyana has a vested interest in its relationship with Exxon and maintaining its control over the oil deposits that it has found. So again, that's the background, that's the context in which we're dealing with and in which Venezuela is dealing with, and that in other circumstances might have seen a multilateral force aimed at Venezuela.
Before we dive into the next segment, I'm going to do our very first commercial. So here goes. And here's something you may not be hearing about. While you're distracted by headlines, farther afield, if I could, you're such a well-known expert in this region that I wanted to ask about Venezuela's current relationship with Mexico. Mexico, of course, has oil. Venezuela is awash in oil. Historically, they have had generally good relations over the years. It ebbs and flows like relations do between any two countries. Is Mexico, do you think, able to take a leadership position in this current situation, maybe to the point of convincing the United States that armed hostilities with Venezuela really are not the way to go?
Well, but if we go back to the Trump first administration, his Secretary of Defense, Mark Epstein, in his book talked about how Trump asked about launching cruise missiles into Mexico. Lest we forget about that, Mexico is also a target of the Trump administration. In the last iteration of his comments on Venezuela, he mentioned that Colombia was in the sites, that Mexico was also in the sites, and I fear that Mexico is also in a very vulnerable position. Its economy is so integrated with the U.S. economy that it's the old adage that when the U.S. catches a cold, Mexico gets pneumonia. It's the old adage, poor Mexico, so close, so far from God, so close to the U.S. So that in that sense, Mexico has certain vulnerabilities, and they're constantly being targeted. Even though there is a free trade agreement between them, the Trump administration doesn't respect it. It wants to renegotiate it. So Mexico is looking at its own situation, its own challenges in dealing with the Trump administration. And plus it has an active issue with the cartels that actually do produce fentanyl and that actually do control some territory and that are a constant challenge to the state and state sovereignty and its ability to exercise control. So in that sense, I don't think that they are able to play the role, the outsized role that they may have played in another context. Colombia has become also a target of the Trump administration. In this last iteration of his comments on Venezuela, he mentioned looking at land targets, and he said land targets in Venezuela as well as in Colombia. So in that sense, he opened up a specter of possible intervention and land attacks in both Venezuela, Colombia, and in Mexico.
In your book, The Enduring Legacy, you argue that oil reshaped everyday life and the notions of citizenship in Venezuela. What parallels or even contrasts do you see with today's debates over resource nationalism and energy transition in Latin America? Are you seeing history repeating itself?
No, I think that era has gone past. Although there's a legacy that remains, and that is the all-powerful state that controls the purse strings, that controls the economy. Because again, oil was nationalized in 76 in Venezuela, 75, and then officially in 76. And oil, the control was over the question of who controlled the Ministry of Petroleum and Hydrocarbons, who controlled the board of directors of the nationalized oil industry, PDVSA, Petróleos of Venezuela, because whoever controlled that controlled the economy. To the extent that the oil company wanted to isolate the state, or at least to create a marginal line around itself to avoid state intervention, created some of the context under which Hugo Chavez could attempt to renationalize the oil company. But I think in the context of what we've seen more recently, I see it very difficult. I think that magical state that Fernando Coronil talked about has disappeared. I think that context has disappeared, that people don't see oil as prosperity anymore to the same extent that they saw it at one time. It's an unfortunate outcome. And it's back to what Juan Pablo Pérez Alfonso, the Minister of Oil, said in the 60s, oil in Venezuela is the excrement of the devil.
I want to switch, if I could, to U.S.-Mexico relations. You have written a great deal over the years about the U.S.-Mexico border and about the long-standing cross-border ties that the two countries have. I mean, all over Texas, we have Mexican mayors who actually sleep in their houses in Texas and then cross the border for safety reasons, cross the border the next day to actually administer their cities. But we've got businesses straddling both sides of the border. We have ranchers that straddle both sides of the border. How should historians' understanding of the border region inform current policy discussions on migration, discussions on security? How are things changing?
I think that the context for that integration it varies. So that you have areas like Nogales, or Ciudad Juárez and El Paso, where that integration is lived on a daily basis. As you point out, people live in El Paso. They may have their economic activity in Ciudad Juárez, Tamaulipas, the same thing. So it varies. San Diego is much different because San Diego has a buffer between itself and the border. It has Chula Vista, has National City, has San Isidro. So it created a buffer around its own interaction with Tijuana. And it was one of the cities that least had influence with Tijuana in the context of a border relationship. I think what's missing sometimes in the national debate are the voices from the border. We always said if we looked at how people got along without the influence of Mexico City or DC, except that image actually evaporated under the Clinton era when you have the Border Patrol exercising a greater role along the border in Ciudad Juárez, El Paso, with Operation Gatekeeper and Operation Lights on the Border, et cetera, and people on the border actually supporting it. So we found that border culture, border society was not sufficiently strong enough to create a new society, to create a new context. Many scholars argued, we have a new culture, a new border culture. It is a mixture. It's Mex-America. It's Mexico and the U.S. Carlos Fuentes, the Mexican author, wrote about it in his book on the border. But the reality is not. The border plays out all the asymmetrical relationships that exist between the U.S. and Mexico on a more concentrated level, on a more clearly defined level. And although there are 40 million people that cross the border between San Isidro and San Diego every year, the most populated border crossing anywhere in the world, where the first world meets the third world. It's also now an area where the rest of the world, the third world, meets the U.S., as we saw with African immigrants, Cuban immigrants, Haitian immigrants, Venezuelan immigrants, Afghani immigrants, Somali immigrants, so that border is no longer just a binational border. It is an international border and has been transformed by what's happened in the last decade.
I want to ask you also about your own career at Pomona College. Looking back on your teaching career and your work in Chicano, Chicana, Latino, Latina studies, what changes have you seen in how students understand Latin America and Latino identities in the U.S. over the years? This must have changed dramatically since the 1970s. What challenges remain?
Well, I think that the change has been dramatic is that the Latino community itself has changed. It's no longer simply Mexican dominant. We now have everywhere in the U.S. a strong Central American population, an increasingly large Caribbean population, Haitian, Cuban, Dominican, the same thing for South America. So that the composition of the Latin American population in the U.S. has changed dramatically. So that if you look at Chicano Latino studies, it is facing a challenge of how to deal and how to address those significant changes. It has to recognize its Mexican base, 64%, 60% is still Mexican, but it also has to recognize the fact that diaspora has produced significant, dramatic changes in how we envision the Latino population in the U.S. Not to think of it as a hegemon, not to think of it as a uniform body, but with all its complexities, with all its class differences, with all its racial and ethnic differences. That's the context in which to envision the Latino population. And that explains why a certain segment voted for Donald Trump in the last election, and why today that segment has now seen the light, and support for Donald Trump has decreased significantly among that Latino population. Many of them thought that when he talked about deporting the bad hombres, in quotes, it didn't mean them, but guess what? It does mean them. As we saw with that young student in Boston traveling to Texas to visit her parents for Thanksgiving, who was deported within 2 days and is now in Honduras, even though she had a protective order.
Just crazy. Before I let you go, I have to ask you, if you were a betting man, would you expect to be at war with Venezuela in the coming weeks or months?
Well, we could argue that we're already at war.
Well, that's a good point.
When you establish a flotilla of dozens of ships off the coast, when you bomb boats unilaterally, when you claim to control their airspace, the reality is controlling airspace is an act of war. And I think that the U.S. Congress is remiss in not forcing the administration to address these issues, as we saw with Hexet, in double killing the individuals, which is a violation of the Geneva Convention, a violation of the UN Convention, a violation of every norm of warfare that exists. You don't kill individuals that have been already neutralized in an act of war. But I do express concern. I am concerned about an escalation. We know what the U.S. record of regime change and nation building has been like in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Libya, in Iraq, or another country in Latin America, whether it's Guatemala, Haiti, Cuba, or elsewhere. And I fear, and I think that that's a critical issue that can unite most people. You may not like Maduro, but you also have to think of the terms of what is national sovereignty, what is independence, what is the rationale behind an intervention. And any opposition force that supports an intervention, a military intervention, in many ways is not asking for a change, but it's asking for them to be replaced with them.
Is almost too much for me to resist. I just wish I could be there with you. But
Well, of course.
thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for interrupting your
Thank you. My
dinner.
pleasure.
Thank your friends as well. We have a lot to talk about. I mainly want to talk to you about Venezuela, and I want to talk to you about NATO in Europe.
Sure.
Before we get there, is there concern in Europe that you can sense, either among the regular folks or the elites, for all these killings of people on the speedboats in the Caribbean by the United States military?
Well, if it comes from the European elites, if it comes from Brussels, or if it comes from the European elites or the governments across Europe, including the Italian government here in Rome, they don't care. And obviously, they don't even question the legality of what's going on. Public opinion is a completely different story. I am in Italy for almost a week now. It's a tour of my latest book, which is called The Multipolar Century, by the way, which is released in a global premiere in Italy. I'm very, very pleased about that because it speaks to European readers about what's going on outside of Europe, the construction of the multipolar world. And my interlocutors here in northern Italy, by the way, for you, Judge, and your audience, a few days ago, I was in the Friuli, surrounded by NATO bases. We should remember that the Friuli was the limit during the Cold War, because right to the right, in fact, was Slovenia, and up to the north was Austria. A few days ago, I was 20 kilometers away from Slovenia and 60 kilometers away from Austria. And the NATO bases are still there, and they're being expanded, including underground NATO bases across the Friuli. Here
So
in
you have underground NATO bases in northern Italy.
Yes.
And you have at least 5 huge major bases throughout Italy, U.S. bases going down to Naples. Why
all
has
the way to Sicily, Judge.
Why has Italy become militarized with non-Italian military?
Absolutely. Well, maybe you, Judge, and our audience know how American commanders, Pentagon commanders, call especially Sicily GOT, American government occupied territory. And this is not a joke. This is a terminology that's been used for decades. And what I've been discussing with my Italian interlocutors is how Italy as a whole, from the Friuli all the way to the Aviano base, all the way to the Sigonella base in Sicily, it is NATO occupied territory. And early this week, the big news independently in Italy this week, the Italian top commander NATO, he's an admiral, in fact, Dragone, from a very influential family. But they tell me, my friends tell me, that he's an absolute stupid specimen. He said on the record, NATO is considering the possibility of a preemptive attack against Russia. It does not get more demented than that. Yes, please.
Why on earth would an Italian admiral? Now, correct me if I'm wrong. He's not just an Italian admiral. He's the chair of some military committee in NATO.
He's
Am I right?
Chair of the NATO Military Committee. You're absolutely correct. Yes. And
why would he make a statement like that?
Because, sorry, NATO now is in deep provocation territory. Provocations are coming on an everyday basis, all the way from that Dutch Gouda that poses as Secretary General to the Fruity or Rudy, to military commanders everywhere, France, Germany. Where's the German army? We haven't seen it yet. And France. But the first time that there is a direct reference to the possibility of a preemptive attack, this, the response by Dmitry Medvedev, which was with the usual Medvedev sense of humor, was okay. There will be a response, but after that, there will be no Europe to negotiate with.
Here's what President Putin, I don't know if he had in mind what this Italian admiral said, but here's what he said to Europe and about Europe right before he spent 5 hours, probably wasted time, but I'll ask you about that in a minute. 5 hours with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Chris, cut number 12.
We are not planning to go to war with Europe. I've said that 100 times already. But if Europe suddenly wants to go to war with us and starts it, we are ready right now. There can be no doubt about that. The only question is, in what way? If Europe suddenly starts a war with us, I think it will be over very quickly. This isn't Ukraine. With Ukraine, we're acting in a surgical, careful manner, right? So that, well, you get it, right?
Confident.
I love the sense of humor of saying literally, I think it will be over very quickly.
So what do you think he's talking about? He's either talking about Oreshniks or nuclear weapons.
Yes, he's talking basically about Oreshniks, Judge, because even if it is a preemptive attack, Moscow would think carefully about they don't need to use nuclear weapons because they have all the hypersonics that matter. And if you launch the hypersonics surgically against NATO bases in could be Ramstein, one of them, in Poland, even Sigonella here in Italy, they can accomplish everything that they want in a matter of minutes. So Russia doesn't need nuclear weapons, but the response will be devastating against these centers of command. But the fact that NATO desperation is leading their military commanders and even the Secretary General to keep doubling down on provocations, it only reveals their desperation and, of course, their way of trying to influence the Russians once again about those 5 hours in Moscow. They don't have a say, not even in a mini table on the side, not to mention the main table.
I mean, why would Putin even care what the Europeans think? Because Donald Trump doesn't care what the Europeans think. The only one who cares what the Europeans think appears to be Zelensky. So you have no Sergei Lavrov there. You have no Marco Rubio there. You do have President Putin there. And then you got these two characters who may be able to put together real estate deals, but they have no diplomatic experience. They have very little knowledge of the history of these things. And President Putin gives them 5 hours?
Well, if we follow what Ushakov, which is one of the official negotiators, and he was at the table during the 5 hours, said afterwards, he said, there will be no leaks, and this was mutually agreed by us and the Americans. Obviously, there will be some leaks coming from the American side. There will be no leaks coming from Russia. So we don't know the substance of the conversation. What we know is that there was a lot of talk about the 28 points that became 19, or maybe even less, but nothing substantial. And if you go through what Ushakov said, he was basically saying that this was a nothing burger. But maybe this could be the beginning of further conversations. We'll keep talking to the other side, etc. Diplomatic language to say, okay, we agree to disagree. And he said many of the points we forcefully cannot accept. And the craziest thing is that the victors delineate the terms at the end of a war. The United States is not a victor, much less the criminal organization, Russian terminology by President Putin, in Kiev. So what Trump envoys are trying to achieve is some sort of concessions from the Russian side. There will be no concessions. The conditions and the stipulations come from June last year by Putin himself, and they won't deviate from that. NATO, no NATO for Ukraine, demilitarization, elections, immediate elections, a government in Kiev that won't be completely Russophobes, and of course, later on, the denazification of this criminal organization and elite, which is going to take at least 2 generations. But it's starting now. The demilitarization of Ukraine. Yes, please.
I know you're in Italy, but are you able to sense any resignation on the part of the Ukrainians to the realistic likelihood that the land now occupied by the Russian military is gone forever?
No resignation, because once again, don't forget, we are dealing with a criminal organization. Criminal organizations, by definitions, don't resign themselves to anything, only if they have a bullet in their head. Figuratively and geopolitically and militarily, they have, but they won't ever admit it, especially because they still count on the support of NATO Secretary General, generals all across NATO stand, politicians, of course, all across Europe, who still believe that if we keep feeding Ukraine with weapons that will be American weapons paid in euros that we don't have in the first place, they can still have a chance of salvaging Plan A. And there was never a Plan B. We have been discussing this here in, among my interlocutors, there are former high-level special forces, former high-level intelligence, a former treasury ministry. So people who know the Italian government from the inside out, in fact, who had access to everything. And now they can, have a critical point of view, not only about Italy, but about how NATO works and, who really issues the orders. And at the same time, they have fabulous, I would say, alternative interpretations of the current karaoke that involved the Kremlin this week.
What are those alternate interpretations?
I'm sorry?
What are those alternate
I will give you one of them, Judge, which is absolutely fascinating because I have not seen that anywhere else. Why Jared Kushner was part of the the Mini 2 American delegation. It's a matter of salvaging international capital in the hands of the Zionist Axis, trying to find a secure place to invest. China, impossible. Europe, dead. So why not try Russia? So they are trying to place these funds in Russia. Nobody in Europe is analyzing it this way. This is something that we should try to get deeper into it. Obviously, we won't get anything out of Kushner himself, of course. But maybe some indiscretions can come from the international financial system, some of those actors. Which, by the way, at the same time, they are already discussing the next pandemic. So that tells us something, that the next pandemic, Judge, and among them, Larry Fink and Bill Gates, they're already talking openly about the possibility of the next pandemic, like right around the corner in 2026. So all this is interconnected. Movement of capital, movement of total control. Who's going to control what, where to place the money, and of course, who can be, which place should be ideal to park untold zillions of funds. They are not safe anymore because of the collapse, little by little, of American debt and the American empire as a whole. So the Russian role in all that, it's still fuzzy. What we know for sure is that the American oligarchy wants to talk to the Russian oligarchy and vice versa because they want to go back to business together. And that would include even American investment in some parts of the Far East and Siberia, and even the Arctic. This is all on the table, and it was certainly discussed in these 5 hours. But that clashes directly with the Russian development project, which is to develop the Far East, the Arctic, and Siberia for Russian national interests, which have nothing to do with international capital interests. So it's all very fuzzy at the moment. Of course, the feeling among the well-informed analysts here in Italy is that this kabuki, or cinema, any way you want to put it, or circus, will continue with no resolution while the war on the ground, on the battleground in Novorossiya, continues to progress steadily.
In your conversations with me just now, and in the written materials that you've sent me in the past week, you have probably used the acronym NATO 30 or 40 times. Do you sense in Italy and elsewhere, either because of NATO or the EU, the creeps like Rutte and von der Leyen, whatever, a loss of sovereignty of these Western European nations?
But this is a number one theme discussed among progressive Italian thinkers, which all of them, of course, are banned from mainstream media and mainstream cable channels here in Italy. The key theme, in fact, if we could sum it all up in 1 minute, from my point of view, I qualify Italy as the unmistakable, unbeatable, unsurpassed civilization state in the whole of the West. Historically, culturally, artistically, there's no competition. And in this, and they add, in these past few decades, Italian sovereignty has completely disappeared to the point of the new generations. The textbooks in school already talk about Italy in terms of Italy being a part of the European Union and NATO without referring to all those glories of Italian civilization since even before the Roman Empire. So it is a neo-colony. People who have been involved in politics in Italy know that Italy became a NATO colony decades ago, and it's going to take at least 1 or 2 generations to recover the condition of a sovereign NATO state. But they also know that this loss of sovereignty applies to all the nation states which are compacted with something that has to be thrown into the trash bin by the European Union. And also they see how the European Union and NATO, this combo, is absolutely desperate because they are now starting to not understand, but be face to face with their strategic defeat vis-a-vis Russia and not the other way around. The famous story that there was never a plan B. Now they're finally coming to grips with the fact that there's no plan B. There are 2 options for them. Either they steal those Russian funds at Euroclear, number 1. Or number 2, they're going to fleece European taxpayers, 450 million of them, to get the funds to continue to finance their war machine in Kiev. So both options are absolutely out of. If option number 2 is adopted, we can expect, I wouldn't say revolutions, but mini serial revolutions in most European nations.
What about our friend in Hungary,
please.
Viktor Orban?
Exactly. Orban is, let's say, he is the graphic illustration of the leader of a nation state that still wants to retain its sovereignty, rebelling against the EU-NATO combo. There are others. There's Fico in Slovakia. Sooner or later, the Austrians. Sooner or later, maybe others in Eastern Europe. Certainly not coming from France, Germany, and much less Italy, where foreign policy in Italy is dictated by people who are totally controlled by the combo European Union, NATO.
Wow. What are you having for dinner?
I had oh shit, this is the best. I should say what I had for lunch, Judge. I had the best gnocchi al burro in the history of humanity in a small restaurant high in the mountains of Piemonte.
So gnocchi is made from potato and al burro is with butter.
with exactly. And I'm having plin. Plin is a pasta from Piemonte with burro and salvia, with butter and salvia, and
All right,
sage.
it's almost dinner time here, and my mouth is watering. But Pepe, it's a pleasure to speak with you all the time. And you travel well and
My
eat
pleasure,
well
sir.
and sleep well, and we'll see you next week.
Definitely. And greetings for all of you from occupied Italy.
Maduro on the phone for about just 15 minutes on November 21st and told him that he and his family had 1 week to flee the country. That deadline would have ended last Friday when Trump, of course, declared on social media that Venezuela's airspace was to be considered closed. So, what are your concerns for how close we could be to land strikes on Venezuela?
Well, I think, unfortunately, the massive buildup has committed us to action. I mean, that we've reached the point very nearly of no return. It's like the Normandy invasion. You know, you had this enormous buildup of forces. The weather isn't perfect. You have a short window in which you can land and do something. So Eisenhower said, execute. And I think at this point, you have a similar situation with President Trump. I think it's a very bad idea. I wouldn't do it. But given the numbers of forces that are there right now, if you don't move them soon, they'll lose their edge because you can only maintain yourself in a posture of readiness for so long before you begin to relax, become tired. People begin to say, what are we doing here? And so forth. So I suspect we're close to execution.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you bring that up because as I'm watching everything unfold in the Caribbean, I'm sitting here going, okay, we've got at least 11 warships, including the USS Gerald R. Ford in the region, along with an estimated 15,000 troops. That makes it seem like something's going to happen, right? The Trump administration wouldn't just send over all of these reinforcements to then go back home. But when it comes to a possible land strike, what do you think that we could be looking at here? Are we talking about just an attempted decapitation strike? Are they going after military sites, or do they even know at this point?
Oh, I think they know. Undoubtedly, they have target lists, and they have tried to identify all the potential air and missile defense sites, along with accompanying radars. We have evidence that the Russians have provided, in addition to air and missile defense, also strike weapons, various kinds of theater ballistic missiles, short-range ballistic missiles, probably short-range more than anything else, that could conceivably be launched at some of the ships at sea if we attack. So I'm sure that someone is looking at all of it and trying to come up with a scenario where we launch enough strikes from the air that we have reasonable confidence that we can land forces without losing a lot of people in the process. Remember, if you're sitting with the Marines offshore, they're probably tasked with seizing something like the international airport, which is right on the coast. That would not be difficult to do. But what you don't want to happen is large numbers of Marines and helicopters flying to the airport who are suddenly destroyed in the air. In other words, what you want to avoid is a mass casualty exercise early on in the operation, because that could sabotage it. One of the things that nobody ever talks about, but it's very important, is what is the tolerance for human losses? How many soldiers, sailors, airmen, or Marines are we prepared to lose in this operation? You always have that. That's discussed. When we went into action back in '91, they estimated roughly a company-size element per brigade. That meant roughly 150 to 200 men per brigade. That means probably 600 to 800 casualties per division-size formation or whatever. You know, they come up with these numbers. You know, there are different analytical models that help you do this. But the point is, I don't know what that is for this operation. But I do know the polls suggested 70% of the American population, when asked, said it's probably not a good idea to go to Venezuela. So I'm sure that has an impact.
I would hope so, right? You look at the American public, they just voted in this guy who said no new wars, and then here he is gearing up for some sort of new war. And on top of that, you also have the fact that the US has already been carrying out attacks in the Caribbean, killing dozens of individuals, claiming that they are alleged narco-terrorists. And now Defense Secretary, or I guess Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, may be getting himself into some trouble as he is claiming that he wasn't in the room when the order was given to launch a second strike that killed the survivors on an alleged drug boat back on the 2nd of September. So how do you view the position that the Trump administration is in when they're carrying out these attacks, and could they be considered as war crimes?
Well, the killings that are involved with these various boats that we've sunk, those are extrajudicial killings. There's no question about it. We have no declaration of war. As far as I know, President Trump has not gone to Congress and asked for any sort of authorization. He apparently seems to think he doesn't need it. His justification, of course, is we're killing drugs. Every boat that we sink saves 25,000 lives. This is all nonsense, of course. All you have to do is go to the Department of, or the Drug and Enforcement Agency, look at the reports that are posted, and you'll find out that less than 4% of the so-called drugs, illegal drugs, are coming out of Venezuela. Most of those consist of cocaine, tends to go to West Africa or Europe. Now, I'm not saying that it doesn't matter or we shouldn't be concerned. What I'm trying to say is that it's not quite what it's being portrayed as. I think everyone has concluded that it's about resources. Number one, access to oil and gas, gold mines, emeralds, lithium, rare earths, these kinds of things. But, frankly, you don't need to go to war for that. You could have made an agreement. The problem is we want absolute obedience out of Venezuela, which means we don't want them doing business with anybody we don't like. And right now they're doing business with Russia, to a lesser extent China and Iran and others. We think this is our hemisphere, and we're not going to tolerate that sort of thing. So we want a government in there that's going to do as we wish. It's that simple. Problem is, Venezuela has 30 million people in it. It's the size of France, Germany, and Austria together. This is not an easy chunk of territory to swallow. You've got Amazonian jungle for much of the terrain, large mountains, particularly on the Colombian border. And you have no certainty of being able to identify all the potential threats. And increasingly, we're seeing a lot of evidence that even in areas like Colombia, where there are people that don't like the Venezuelans and the Venezuelans that don't like the Colombians, there's a willingness now to cooperate, because this could turn into a Latino rallying cause against the evil, white Yankee from North America, which is kind of the sort of thing you really want to avoid if you have any brains. We don't want to do that. I mean, it's the last thing in the world that you want. But again, this is where we are. And I think, unfortunately, unless he has a sudden come to Jesus moment and says, on second thought, I had a conversation with Mr. Maduro, I'm going to take his offer. We're going to stand down and work our way through this. Thank you very much. I think he could do it. I think it would be a wise move, but I don't see it happening.
Yeah, it's very concerning as you're watching this build up and hearing these reports of just a 15-minute call. I do want to bring up the American people's appetite for all of this, because as you were talking about earlier, right, the possibility of losing American troops in some sort of operation. Let's say they go in, they take the airport off the coast. Well, then you're still looking at a much more involved war that now the U.S. military is getting involved in. Now you've got American soldiers coming home in body bags. When you look at the American people and how much they're willing to put up with, I mean, the Trump administration can tell us all day long it's about stopping illegal drug trafficking, but do you see Americans being willing to get into another endless war?
Well, I think the easy answer is no. However, there's a lot of experience in the Department of Defense, or now the Department of War once again, that if you can minimize your losses, you probably can get away with a great deal. In other words, what you don't want to do is awaken the beast. The beast is the American electorate. If you take 50 or 60 wounded, 5 or 10 killed on the first day, everyone will say, oh, well, that's unfortunate. But if you lose 300 or 400 in a day and they're killed, Then everybody wakes us and said, wait a minute, we didn't sign on for this. That's too many. What are you doing? So the game is, first of all, pulverize Venezuela into submission from the air or from the sea with missiles. Pulverize in the sense that you eliminate, hopefully, all of their military capability or most of it. They don't have that much. It's a very large area and you can disperse it and it can be dangerous as a result. You try to do that. Then if you go in, you want to try to avoid losses that you might otherwise take with an unhappy population that really doesn't care to be occupied by a large group of Yankees from North America. So, the answer to your question, if you don't lose very many up front and you can minimize the losses that you do take on a daily or weekly basis, you can probably get away with it for a while. But then this is not the only game in town. We've got problems in the Middle East. That war is not over. The situation in Ukraine is probably nearing an end simply because there aren't very many Ukrainians left to fight. They're running out of airspeed and altitude. But there's no certainty that you can avoid a fiscal crisis. Our financial condition is very fragile. The economy is not good, contrary to what the president keeps saying. And Americans are not doing well. So you have to wrap all of it together. You can't see everything in isolation. If we were only looking at Venezuela, we had nothing going in the Middle East, nothing going in Eastern Europe, that would be a different problem. But it's not. It's part of a much larger global problem that confronts us right now.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point to keep in mind as you're watching this. It can't just be in isolation. And while I have you here, I do want to bring up the situation when it comes to tensions between the US and Russia, because we, of course, know that Russian President Putin met with US envoy Steve Witkoff and Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, in Moscow on Tuesday. And not only did it not lead to a major breakthrough from everything we've heard, but reports say that Witkoff and Kushner canceled what was supposed to be their follow-up meeting with Zelensky and are headed back home. So how do you view the state of talks there? Is there a potential for a possible deal, or is the war in Ukraine more likely to be decided on the battlefield?
Well, I think the words that were used by the delegation were, we had very good talks, but much more work needs to be done. That was the sort of initial comment. What that means is this went nowhere. I mean, in diplomatic parlance, it's a dead end. And now the fact that they're headed back and they're not bothering with Ukraine indicates that they probably briefed the president. The president said, okay, give my best to Mr. Putin, come home. There's no point in persisting in this. I hope. I think what those two men went to Moscow to do really had less to do with Ukraine and much more to do with President Trump. Now, what do I mean by that? I think President Trump wants a good optical illusion. What is a good optical illusion? It's a setting where he and Putin are photographed agreeing to something that will end the conflict, so that he can take credit for having brought peace to Ukraine in, what is it, the 19th war that he's ended, whatever. That failed. Now, that's not because President Putin would not like to throw him a bone. I'm sure he would. Here, Donald, here's a bone for you. Thanks so much. We want to work with you, because the Russians want to restore normal relations with us. I think President Trump would like to restore normal relations with Moscow. But he's surrounded by people who want perpetual hatred of Russia, just as they want perpetual war in the Middle East against everyone in the region that doesn't like Israel. And they're also enthusiastic about going after Venezuela because they've made the serious mistake of doing business with Iran, which, after all, is an existential threat to Israel. So the sort of neoconservative Zionist clique that currently controls your government is all in for these conflicts. It's very difficult for him, given that they're his donors. When you look at Witkoff and Kushner, they represent the donors. They are part of the cabal. So I think he's done what he in his mind believes he can do, and he's pulled out. Now, the danger here is, of course, the Europeans and the Ukrainian. When I hate to say Ukrainians, because I don't think this regime anymore represents Ukraine in the slightest sense of the word. I think they're murdered millions of Ukrainians. They're criminals. But I think the European globalists that don't represent their populations and Zelensky and his friends all have an interest in maintaining the conflict. Once that conflict ends, what do you do if you're Starmer, Macron, and Merz? You have no legs to stand on. You've lied to everybody repeatedly about the great danger that Russia presents. If you look at Germany right now, Germany and France and England are all in very, very bad shape, not just economically, but domestically. Population is furious. You rarely see Germans in great numbers take to the streets, which has happened in Berlin and around the country. They only become aggravated under the most serious circumstances. The Germans want Merz gone. They hate this government. And if you look at the alternative platform that's under serious consideration, that could easily be substituted for what is there now, what does it mean? Well, it means that we're going to restore relations with Russia. We want to get back to business as usual with the Russians. We are going to get out of NATO, and we don't like the EU. Well, put that together, and that is the complete disintegration of everything that everybody for the last 80 years is accustomed to. And that has worked very much, we think, to our advantage. President Trump would have been a very smart man to help us disengage from all of this, recognizing the handwritings on the wall. That was on the wall back in 2016. But he wasn't able to do it, and he can't do it right now. Why? He's constrained by donors.
Yeah, and as you're watching all of this play out, right, you're looking at the Trump administration, and I'm with you. You're going, okay, wouldn't the most logical thing be to try to work with Russia to figure out what deals can we make? How can we have a mutually beneficial relationship? And especially as you pay attention to what's happening on the battlefield right now, because I know that Russian officials confirmed this week that the Russian military has taken control of several key frontline cities, including Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region and Kupiansk and Volchansk in the Kharkov region. Yet the West is still claiming that's not the case. I mean, I see articles every day saying that all of these facts being presented by Russia are up for debate, and we just watch the West continue to be in this delusional state. And I guess to hope that the public is going to be on board with it. What does that mean for the West when our officials are not truly taking reality into account and truly taking things seriously and figuring out, okay, what is the best way to end this war? Because we're not going to win it.
Well, two things. First of all, Reuters published an article very recently about 11 Ukrainians. It's kind of a band of brothers in the Ukrainian military. And it follows these 11 Ukrainian soldiers through their experience. At the end of the process, there are only 2 left alive, and those 2 deserted. Now, whether or not anybody else is alive, they're so badly wounded and so utterly destroyed as human beings, they have no chance of ever doing anything normally for the rest of their lives. So I think the truth is out there if you're willing to look at it and see it. And that kind of article is worth its weight in gold because it's a glimpse of reality. It's not a glimpse for you and me or for Larry Wilkerson or any number of people that are out there been talking about this for 3 years. But most Americans are not accustomed to this. It's a very sobering thing. So I hope a lot of Americans will look at that. Beyond that, the government is not really interested in the American people and what it thinks any more than the globalist governments in Europe are interested in the American people or interested in the European peoples and what they think. They have an agenda. Their agenda is to loot the society for all the money they can get out of it. And they have lots of accomplices in the Senate and the House. Everybody is there to enrich themselves. Why else do you go into politics? This is something that most Americans haven't figured out. This is something that's been true in Latin America or the Middle East, much of Asia forever. Why do you become a policeman? Well, if you become a policeman, you can extract money from your victims. Who are your victims? People that you pull over for a parking ticket or who commit some crime and are unfortunately discovered in the process, and you blackmail them. You extract cash from them. That's why people become policemen. That's why in a place like Iraq or Egypt, everybody wants to be a policeman. Put you in charge. You can take bribes. You can make money. The same thing is true in many of these military establishments in much of the developing world. Well, unfortunately, it's now true for Washington. Now, I'm not saying it was never true in the past, but it's reached the point of absurdity now. Everyone is on the take. Everyone is for sale. It's rare that you see someone like Rand Paul who stands up and says, no, I can't support this. This is a war crime. That's unacceptable. He's not on the take. He's not being enriched by large donors. In fact, I'm sure he's now a target like Thomas Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene was and others who've said no, thank you. So it's a bad situation. Donald Trump is at severe risk. He may not understand this. He may think that he's invincible, invulnerable, and immune. He's not. He's in a very risky position. Going into Venezuela is a very bad idea. Nothing good will come out of this. No matter how hard he tries to spin it, his donors spin it, and the people in the media that are, once again, on the take from the donors, they can't spin their way out of this when this happens. This is right on our doorstep.
Yeah, it's very telling, the situation that we're in and getting into, and we're watching as the Trump administration is continuing to walk right towards it. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing and continuing to raise awareness about where things are headed all around, whether it's economically or on the foreign policy stage. And I appreciate you.
Coffee. Follow me.